roll call, please.
Here to have a deadline.
Hello?
It's working.
Mrs. Belford?
Present.
Ms. McDougall?
Present.
Mrs. Jenkins?
Present.
Mrs. Campbell?
Present.
And Mr. Susan?
Present.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, we have several policies to review today. We'll begin with Board Policy 6144, Investments. Ms. Cindy Lisinski, Chief Financial Officer, will make the introductions.
Hi, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce Katrina Kostner. She manages our treasury operations. That includes the banking relationship, interface with treasury, cash flow, forecasting, investments, and our debt service. She does an absolutely tremendous job, and you'll soon see that. We also have Scott Stitcher here. He's a director at PFM Asset Management, and he's one of our advisors. So they're going to go through the investment policy with you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So, investment policy number 6144. It's been nearly a decade since this was last revised. So the last revision was in 2012, so 9 years. This revision was developed in partnership with the district's investment advisor, PFM. So because of the length and the technical nature of this policy, Scott Stitcher and I will go through just a little bit more details about this revision and hopefully answer any questions you may have. So we're going to skip over the format and language that's pretty evident in the red line draft, and we're going to move to the standards of prudence section. This is on page 2 and 3 of the red line draft, and it reads as follows. As part of a prudent assessment, the district may liquidate and or reinvest funds that have been deemed invested in institutions with a history of non-compliance with state or federal law or not consistent with the district's ethical standards. The district can invest and or reinvest to better further the statutory objectives of safety of principal, liquidity, and return on investments in that order, even if the alternative rate of return will be lower than the original investment. So the next part of this revision is pretty straightforward. We added 2 sections just to comply with state statute. These sections can be found on page 4 of the red line draft. Risk and diversification. Portfolio assets shall be diversified to control risk resulting from over-concentration of assets in a specific maturity, issuer, instruments, dealer, or bank through which these instruments are bought and sold. In partnership with the investment advisor, the Director of Accounting Services with appropriate staff shall determine diversification strategies within the established guidelines. Immediately following that section is the Master Repurchase Agreement section. Approved institutions and dealers transacting repurchase agreements will be required to execute and perform as stated in the SIFMA Master Repurchase Agreement. All transactions under repurchase agreements shall also adhere to the requirements of the SIFMA Master Repurchase Agreement. So the next part of this revision, we're going to go over sector and issuer maximums. So the maximums are expressed as a percentage of the overall portfolio. So we have one maximum for each sector, and that's just a category of investment type. And then we have another maximum within each sector for each issuer. And an issuer is just an entity that sells security to finance something. So I really encourage you to look at your handout on this next slide because there's a lot of detail. And before I go into a lot of detail about this handout, I just want to mention that it does correspond to the table on page draft. So you can follow along there. There's much more detail on that red line draft, but it's the same information. The other thing I want to point out with this part of the revision is we had an objective to really make sure that the district had all the tools in the toolbox to manage all different kinds of market environments, but more importantly, to handle all the needs of the district. So is the market, are the rates rising? Are they lowering? Do we need more liquidity, less liquidity? Do we need to go further out? All the varying, whatever, today, tomorrow as well. Any?
Many tools in the toolbox as possible. So a lot of times there's a perception that if you're adding sectors to your policy, you may be increasing the overall risk of the portfolio, but the idea is quite the opposite. The goal is really to reduce the overall risk to the district. So having the ability to invest in more sectors, in more securities, again, has the benefit of reducing risk. So
Goes back to that statute.
it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
It does.
Okay, thanks. So I'm not going to go over every single line on here. I do want to point out that we have three columns on the handout that refer to your sector maximums, the current max, the proposed max, and then of course in blue you have your change. Then the issuer max within that sector for our current policy and our proposed, and then in yellow that change by issuer. So I'm going to go start with agency MBS, which MBS stands for mortgage-backed securities. And in our current policy, it's not clearly defined that that has a lower maximum. And in this proposed revision, it really calls out that subsector to have a lower maximum of 25%. And then, of course, the issuer, a maximum of 25%. Scott, do you want to add anything?
So I think you hit the nail on the head. The way the policy had been written, it wasn't very explicit. So it really would have allowed someone to invest 80% in that particular sector. And so this is just more clearly defining that maximum allocation to that sector. So again, at the end of the day, technically reducing the exposure to that sector, reducing the overall risk potentially in that sector.
Great. Thanks. So let's talk about line item number 3 and 6. We're going to combine them because they're very similar, but they're kind of two ends of the spectrum. So corporate securities and commercial paper, they're all investments in a company or a bank, but they have varying characteristics. Corporate securities go out in the years, whereas commercial paper is 9 months or less. So they're differing tools for whatever the district needs are in the market environment. You want to add anything to that, Scott?
So the one thing that's not clear on, if you're looking at this particular handout, but it is in more detail in the actual policy, is that we're looking at those two sectors in total as well. So you can only allocate 50% combined to corporates and commercial paper. Again, it's hard to tell from this handout, but that is an additional layer of protection, again, seeking to minimize exposure to any one sector or risk in any one sector. So it's a combination of those two sectors, a maximum of 50%.
Right.
Is that clear?
Yeah, currently we could do 55%. So our revision has it capped at 50. And really allowing us to kind of use, based on what our needs are, we can teeter-totter on corporates or commercial paper.
Right. If liquidity is more important, you could overweight towards commercial paper, or if liquidity is less of an issue And you have the ability to go out and invest in longer-term securities, and then corporate notes become more attractive in that case.
Right. So the other thing about commercial paper that is a bit of a change is that we're reducing the exposure per issuer from 10 to 5%. So.
Yep.
So let's talk about item number 4, municipal obligations. The big change here is by issuer. Again, more restrictive by issuer, managing that risk. Let's talk about item 7, asset-backed securities. This is an addition to this revision. Again, to add more diversification, but then capping that risk by keeping the issuer low at 5%. Scott, you want to add anything about asset?
It's a great complement to commercial paper, so we view this more, again, as a liquidity type instrument. So even though the state of maturity may be longer on these, on this particular sector, the average life tends to be much shorter. So it becomes, again, a nice alternative to a shorter duration security like commercial paper. And to Katrina's point, you know, we're limiting the issuer exposure to 5% as well. So again, that perception sometimes of a new sector might cause some folks heartburn, but at the end of the day, you are increasing your opportunity set. And we view this as a very favorable way to diversify and enhance yield with, again, not increasing the overall risk of your portfolio.
Right, goes back to that statute.
Yeah.
So the next item would be number 8, and that's repurchase agreements. And the big change here is just making it more restrictive in that sector and by issuer. You want to add anything about repurchase agreements?
I would just add that this is, again, I talked earlier about thinking for the long term and recommendations we make are for the long term. Today, this is really somewhat of a moot point. It's a sector that we're not heavily utilizing, but that's not to say that down the road it potentially could be a sector that we utilize. So again, we're thinking long term here more broadly, but I think that's sort of one of the reasons why you're seeing a reduction to the overall allocation in that particular sector. The issuer change, again, the idea there just reducing your exposure to any one issuer. So again, the idea being more long-term, but really less of an issue today, just given the underutilization by us in this particular sector. Just not attractive. So maybe that's an important point to make. So we do consider ourselves relative value managers. So we are actively always looking for opportunity amongst these sectors that are available to us. And today, repurchase agreements just don't really offer us any value or are not attractive to us.
So I'm going to lump the last 3 together. Money market, LGIP, and LGIP stands for Local Government Investment Pools, and Florida Prime. So these are all structured very similarly. They all have underlying assets within the pool or fund, and the participants can purchase a share of the fund. They all have a net asset value of typically $1 in the funds that the district would purchase. And so I'm going to lump them all together. Their biggest benefit for the district is liquidity. You get your money in and you can get it out the next day. And they're a wonderful strategic tool to use for whatever the district's needs are in short-term liquidity and long-term liquidity as well, going out anywhere from 0 to even 12 months sometimes, depending on what type of needs we have. Anything you want to add about those?
So you'll note that the sector allocation increases substantially in LGIPs, and the main reason behind that, to Katrina's point about a stable NAV, stable net asset value, dollar in, dollar out, the liquidity and safety that these vehicles offer. The reason we've increased LGIPs is back in, I want to say 2016, the SEC implemented new rules around money market funds that required prime money market funds to float their net asset value. So one day you might put $1 in, and the next day it might be worth not 0.9998 cents. So it made prime money market funds much less attractive to entities like the school district. It made LGIPs that are not required to float their net asset value much more attractive, okay? So with that said, we have limited money market funds to government money market funds that aren't required to float their net asset value. So you have that safety of principal, dollar in, dollar out. And then we've increased exposure to LGIPs for, again, the safety they offer in the stable net asset value and the enhanced yield that they offer over government money market funds. So again, it's just increasing your opportunity set in this space. So still have that safety, still have that liquidity that's required, and again, making the LGIPs that much more attractive.
Right, and
Does that
that's
help?
explicitly stated on page 8 of the red line draft. They have to have that objective of preservation of principal, and they have to maintain that stable NAV of $1. Okay. So anything else you want to add to this in general?
Nothing on my end.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to go over is similar information. You do have this in a handout. This was provided to us by PFM. This is a comparison of our current policy to our proposed policy, and then the policies of seven other school districts. And I'm going to let Scott talk about this since PFM provided this for us.
Okay. So PFM, our client base is strictly public entities, cities, counties, school districts, special districts. And one thing that we've found in our 40-plus years in this business is that our clients don't like to be the first to do anything, right? They are not trendsetters by any stretch of the imagination. So what we've done here is provided you with a peer comparison to show you that what we're proposing as far as enhancements are not drastically different than what your peers are doing in the state of Florida. And I don't know if I really need to say much more than that. The numbers kind of speak for themselves. You can kind of see where your current policy is there in gold and the proposed enhancements there in green. And then you can just kind of run across to see that, what we're proposing, again, is not drastically different than what your peers are doing. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Okay.
And that by no way was meant to be a knock on any public entity or anything. It's just a fact. It's just true. It's reality.
And we're okay with it. Not all the time, but here we are.
Okay, so the last part of this revision involves attachments A and B. These can be found on pages 25 through 40 of the red line draft. It's an attachment. A is a glossary of cash and investment terms. And attachment B is a questionnaire for investment pools / funds. So this is recommended best practices by the Association of Public Treasurers. You want to say anything else about it?
I think the only thing I would add, Katrina, is that when we review policies and make recommendations, we do so with a few things in mind. We first and foremost, we're looking at state statute to drive that recommendation. We're also looking at the Government Finance Officers Association. They publish best practices on a number of topics, but around investment policies as well. And then you have this third area, the Association of Public Treasurers of the United States and Canada, APT, US&C. So those sort of serve as our guiding principles. We pull from those what we consider to be, again, all the best practices and incorporate them into your policy. The US&C, the APT US&C also has a program whereby you can submit your policy to them. You pay a small fee for this, but you submit your policy to them, and they'll review it and then let you know if there are any shortcomings, anything that needs to be added to the policy to meet what they consider to be the best standards in investment policy. If you meet those standards or you have any shortfalls and you incorporate those in, they will sort of endorsed. They'll give you a certificate saying, you know, your policy meets all the minimum standards of a well-written investment policy. So maybe something to consider once we get through this process of updating.
But we already meet the GFOA.
You do, that's why there
Yes,
was no
yeah.
reference to the GFOA
Yeah.
in here, that's right. And then for the most part, you had everything required by state statute as well, so, yeah.
Just those two sections we
Right,
added, right?
right.
Okay. All right, so do we have any questions?
Any board members have any questions for the team? Ms. Campbell?
So, thank you. This is a lot of work and a really long policy. So, but it's very complex and covers a lot of things. There was in here, and I'm going to see if I can find it, an addition. I think it's on page 3 of the red line. The paragraph that was added in as part of a prudent assessment, the district may liquidate or reinvest funds that have been deemed invested in institutions with a history of non-compliance with state or federal law. I'm just remembering our news story from a couple years ago, and I'm wondering if that helps us with those kinds of issues. If there's any questions, and we dealt with that, like most of those companies, I think that where there was some, I guess, question of ethics from the past, they were in the past. But does this kind of help us avoid some of those situations in the future?
You want me,
Go
want me to
ahead.
attempt
I'll let
this?
you go first.
It's not going to help you avoid the potential fraud that could exist in an underlying corporate security or commercial paper. The intent behind it was it more clearly defines, and please tell me if I'm off base here. but
Sounds like you're on the right track.
Okay. It more clearly defines your ability, if that issue were to arise again, to sell that security, even if it meant realizing a loss in that particular security.
Right. And I know
Okay?
we had asked the Attorney General, Paul had
Mm-hmm.
asked the Attorney General to give us some, because of our 3 priorities, right?
Correct.
So this allows us, because of her opinion, and this allows us to make those changes,
That's
even if it doesn't, even if it pulls us out of line with those 3.
That's correct.
Right, and in
Okay.
fact,
Exactly
that's
right.
exactly where we got that paragraph that we added.
Okay.
It's from that AG response.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, team, for making that happen. That's all I've got.
Anybody else have anything? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate all your work on this.
Oh, my pleasure.
Ms. Belford, if I may, just to add my appreciation to PFM and Scott for working closely with us. I believe the board is aware. I have the opportunity to sit on the advisory board of Florida Palm, which is the statewide governmental collaborative or collection of investors.
Investment pool, yep.
Yep, the investment
exactly.
pool, and PFM is the advisor on that, and I believe it's up over $3 billion in assets in that pool. So I have a unique opportunity to see both their engagement with several governmental agencies as well as our own investments as Brevard Public Schools, and just been very appreciative of the response and the expertise and the thoroughness of what they bring to the table and the service they're providing. So I just wanted to provide that context as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words.
Okay. We will now move on to Board Policy 5830 on student fundraising. Chris Moore, Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, will go over the executive summary.
Hey, good afternoon. This is 5830, student fundraising. This revised policy addresses the related new crowdfunding policy, 6605. In fact, this policy was revised specifically to add the language for the crowdfunding policy into it. It also adds some new language on student fundraising, 5830, to align with the proposed, which encompasses the suggested language from Neola. And after the last presentation, I looked and I thought, when was this policy last revised? Ironically enough, 10 years ago today was the last revision of this policy. If you take a look at it, you'll see we added the language for crowdfunding in under fundraising approval number 5, which specifically addresses how we're going to go about doing it, but it's mostly maintained under the new crowdfunding policy. But it also adds the language for some fundraising restrictions and some advisor restrictions as it relates to fundraising in alignment with the Neola language.
Anyone have any comments or questions for Ms. Moore on this policy? Ms. Campbell?
Yes. First of all, I have to say that the inclusion of microwave ovens as potential rewards to advisors was reminding me of something out of the 70s and 80s, but woohoo! No microwave ovens for our staff. But on a serious note, on the restrictions, I just wanted to ask, what was the reason behind, Neola gives 2 offers when it comes to food offered during the school day. So what was the reasoning behind choosing option 1 instead of option 2 for the food? I don't know, I'm just thinking about, man, why can't you have a lollipop at lunchtime? But, I understand we're under new rules.
Hold on, let me get back to what option 1 looks like again.
I think option 1 is the one that looks like closer, I haven't looked in word by word, but it pretty much restricts all food that does not meet the strict USDA nutrition guidelines. But then option 2 allowed some exceptions. And I tried to find those, I couldn't find the exact exceptions when I chased those rabbits, but I know it said that in the USDA website, and then it said something about each state can have their own rules about exceptions, something like that.
Yeah, I have to be honest and tell you I need to go back into policy 8550. That was in conversation with food and nutrition, and I can't really address why that one was chosen over another. I
Okay.
apologize.
And it's 8,500, right, Pam? Because
Yeah.
I think we figured out it's it got corrected in here, but
Yeah.
it was Neola had it listed wrong. It's 8,500.
I thought we had corrected it on here
I
too.
think you already cleared that up.
There we go.
Somewhere. Okay. Well,
So that was in conversation
Oh.
with food and nutrition, so.
Okay, good. No, it's actually is still incorrect on the clean copy under C2. As 8550. Okay, I just wondered how that looks right now. I mean, are we doing that right now? Because it seems like we do offer, or we have in the past, it's Valentine's Day. Do you want to send candygrams to your friend, pay $1, and they'll send, a chocolate whatever to the friend of your choice, or, same thing at Christmas time, sometimes we do it like a candy cane. It sounds like to me that kind of fundraiser would not be allowed under the wording as it is in C2.
I will tell you, I have to go back to food and nutrition and have a conversation with them.
Okay. I would appreciate that.
I will
when you
do
get back
that,
to us
yeah.
for next time. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Susan?
So on the red line draft, section B, fundraising approval, subsection 3, says student-wide and classroom incentives are permitted with the approval of the principal. Incentives for individual students may be permitted if they have educational value. Do we have a definition of educational value, just out of curiosity?
I would leave that for the principal to determine.
Okay.
Where are you?
Section B, number 3.
Okay, and then this is something that you go to subsection 6 under B. It says superintendent or students, if you read down, it says under administrative procedures of the superintendent. And it consistently throughout the policy references the procedures of the superintendent. I was trying to find those specific procedures. Do we have those online? I looked inside 8500 and then went back through the procedures. Do we have a process in place?
We do. It's out of finance. I would have to pull those for you.
Okay.
It's, you know the fundraising procedures that are in each school where you have to apply for,
Yep.
to do a fundraiser?
Yep. Okay. And then you come down here to subsection C subsection 1, raffles and all games of chance are prohibited.
Yes, sir.
Why? This has always been my big bother, right? Being a former teacher that taught for 9 years, this was the big thing, right? What's the reason behind that?
I would love to punt this over to finance, but I don't know if finance is ready to handle why raffles and all games of chance are prohibited. It has always been. If you would like me to look into whether that needs to continue to be, I'll go through statute and find out.
Yeah, I don't think it's statutorily. I think it's just something that we've always done in this district, and it's always been,
I think it's
I need to review it.
Amy used to go nuts when she
but
had
there's,
the Brevard Schools Foundation raffle things up on the doors. It's statute.
Yeah, I can't rattle off the citation, but that's what my memory says, so I'll go back and review it and get that information
no, I
for
mean,
you.
I can review it.
Hello, I'm not sure if it's prohibited in statute or not, but I know in our accounts procedures manual, we refer those types of things to the foundation, and we run it through the foundation as opposed to through the internal account.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of times, and I'll get down to the bottom of it if it is statute or not, right? My thing is that we have an opportunity in some places to make a lot more than what we normally do based on raffles, and almost every organization I'm a part of does raffles. And I can see that there could be an opportunity for risk there, but I think sometimes when we're dealing with the opportunity that we have for risk versus reward might be there. And then the next one is so I guess I'll find out from the Florida statute or whatever it is that drives that specific piece. In the same subsection C, subsection 2, it talks about competitive foods in 8550, but we know that that's 8500. And then it basically says inside the competitive foods policy, which I took a picture of it because I was having difficulty on the internet here, it speaks specifically to no food or beverage other than those associated with the district's food services program are to be sold during the school day unless allowed by state, federal procedures. So what is the school day? What is the time period of the day?
That, again, I'd have to have Kevin Thornton in here to talk about what that is, because there is a specific time in their policy that a half an hour before food services, a half an hour after, and I don't want to misquote him, but that's a question for food and nutrition, but I can get the answer for you.
Yeah. And I can always email them too. All right. Door-to-door solicitation by students is prohibited. I had mentioned in, I think, the Neola or the original template, it had allowed high school students with groups of 2 or more, but we got rid of that because of the current environment.
Well, for 2 reasons. Number one, it was in conflict with our procedures. In our procedures, it said it was prohibited altogether, and we decided to err on the side of caution. And then, again, it helped our current environment. There's no way of knowing what the future holds.
Are you guys okay with them not going door to door to knock on doors to receive money?
I'd say fundraisers for years now have been discouraging students from doing the traditional, like when we were kids, going door to door because of safety reasons.
Plus,
I
there's
mean,
a lot
if you
of-
know your neighbors, you obviously could go door to door, but just to go door to door cold calling, that's discouraged even by the fundraising companies that come in.
That's true. All right. I'll drill on those other things later, and thank you so much for answering those questions.
Anyone else have questions for Ms. Moore on this policy? Ms. Moore, I do have one, and if you need to punt to Mr. Thornton, I completely understand, but I'll just throw it out there. So on section C, number 2, it says that any food consumed on campus
Right.
must meet those requirements. So does that mean that our talent shows that happen on the campus after hours can no longer do bake sales or sell pizza slices or?
I'd have to punt back to Kevin Thornton. I imagine it falls under that school hours, but let me get you better answers from Kevin Thornton.
Okay, super, thank you. Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? All right, thank you so much, Ms. Moore. Next is policy 6605, crowdfunding. This is a proposed new policy, and Ms. Lisinski will provide us the executive summary.
Okay. Yeah, this is on. Saying is something that was new to me. I didn't know what crowdfunding was, so I just want to make sure that everyone understands what that is. It's a practice of raising money from a large number of people in small amounts through any internet-based platform. And the donor, like when I used to have to go door to door and those kind of things, you buy something and then part of those proceeds go to it doesn't work that way. You're providing money and you don't get anything in return. You're just you're providing money to ensure that whatever you're providing money for is purchased, if that makes sense. So the purpose of this policy is to ensure the compliance with all the applicable federal and state laws, Florida State Board of Education rules, board policies, administrative rules, procedures, and guidelines. In addition, the proposed policy promotes transparency and accountability. So the goal of this policy is to be able to support teachers and principals in leveraging crowdfunding while ensuring the right level of oversight and protection are in place. And then the summary of the proposed policy, the new policy will apply to, and then this is something that I read on Friday that I realized that we needed to add. This is just talking about district personnel. It's not talking about PTOs or anything like that. This is just district personnel. So to apply to them for a form of crowdfunding utilizing an online service or website-based platform for financial benefit or gain of the district. Through the use of personal networking, social media platforms, and other internet-based resources, funds are solicited or raised to support a specific campaign or project, and the proposed policy encompasses the suggested language from Neola. Currently, there is crowdfunding that is occurring within the district, and I would say that we don't have a good handle on of what's going on, and I would say that principals in the schools probably don't know all of the things that the teachers may be putting out there. So this is an attempt to get our arms around that, to make sure that the funds and the purchases that are the campaigns are aligned with the principal's vision, is aligned with the board's priorities, that that the funds are going to good things. It's also to ensure that the right reasons aligned with the visions represent the school and the district in a positive light. We and protect. Also make sure those funds come into so there's two different kinds. You can collect money for something, and then the check shouldn't go to that employee. The check should go to the school and deposit it into internal funds, and then we ensure that it purchases that thing. The other way is the funding can go to some of these sites, and they actually purchase it and send it to that school. Now those items are now part of that school. So we're trying to get our arms around that. And then also transparency. Parents want to know, if I'm donating this kind of money, that it's going towards what I think it's going towards. So that's the purpose of this policy. Is there any questions?
Questions for Ms. Lisinski?
I have a question.
Ms. Jenkins?
So if I am a teacher who is on Donors Choose, which is a website where people crowdfund from all over the place, then they purchase the supplies and they send it to the school, do I have to get permission from my principal for what I'm putting up on Donors Choose?
That's what we're recommending, that it gets approved by the principal to ensure that whatever you're purchasing aligns with the priorities and the vision, to make sure. I mean, you could be purchasing computers that don't work with our network, or I mean, there's all kinds of different things, but you just want to make sure. The principal also needs to make sure that there isn't just this wide use of. I mean, he or she has to balance the use of those funds, I think, to make sure that it's fair and equitable, and that it's and again, it's the principal's call of how he wants to handle those things. My thought is you have to kind of, he or she needs to understand what is being bought and purchased in the school, in my opinion.
So I guess just for all of you, from my perspective, I kind of take an issue with that a little bit, just because I feel like it kind of restricts potentially what could be donated to those classrooms. I don't know, it's confusing to me, because as a teacher, I can go purchase whatever I want for my classroom without approval from my principal, and I don't have to care if it's equitable or meets the needs of our school and the priorities of our school. So, I don't know how that could be addressed, but that's just something that kind of concerns me a little bit, because I know that's a big one. I've used it myself when I worked at a Title I school, got almost $2,000 worth of products sent to our school. The certain companies, they'll explicitly state that that becomes the property of that school that it's donated to. You have to kind of verify the school that you work at in order to use them. So I just kind of question that piece a little bit.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, in some examples, a teacher, well, I understand what you're saying. And I would think those are the right campaigns, that what you just described is what we hope that is happening.
So, Ms. Belford, can I speak to that? I think part of where it needs, what kind of explains for me why that principal supervision needs to come in place is the part in the third paragraph that talks about these are things that are not required to provide a free, appropriate public education. So there is a line where we shouldn't be crowdfunding things that should be provided for in the budget as part of the baseline. I imagine that comes out of statute, even though I didn't look up all the statutes for this one. But so I think that's part of it, just to have extra eyes on. I don't, you know, I would hate to think, Ms. Jenkins, that this policy is something that's used for someone to say, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. I think it's just a matter of, hey, let's get extra eyes on it to make sure that you're not getting in trouble, getting into to a fundraising situation that actually could cause lots of problems, like buying things that won't work on the network, and I'm sure Russell Cheatham probably would have something to say about that. Because last summer, I saw some GoFundMes and Donors Choose and other things about buying an extra set of computers for classrooms and things, which is a noble goal, but that needs to be run through ET to make sure that the parameters of all those machines are things that'll work on our network if they're going to be on our network. So I think those kinds of things are reasons why fundraisers like this need to be run by an administrator.
And then also, you know, there's different restrictions to make sure that pictures of students aren't on there, or, you know, they're, you know, just the way it's presented to make sure that it represents the school very well and represents the district. You know, and I don't, you know, hopefully this wouldn't happen, but, you know, it's possible that somebody, you know, the principal won't fund this, so I need your help, or, you know, just to make sure that it's written in a positive light, so it represents the school and the district well.
So I guess what I'm concerned about is it kind of takes away the autonomy of that classroom teacher a little bit, though. And I guess I'm concerned as well that something like this might restrict certain people from then doing that. They might feel like, oh, I have to get this approved now. I understand what you're saying with the technology piece and maybe a review of it. I don't know. Thank you.
Can I follow that up? So part of where I think you're going with that autonomy, and where I see this and where I agree with Campbell, but at the same time see the other side of it, is that we had at one of my elementary schools, the PTO raised enough money to buy computers for the whole staff. And they were going to go through Costco, and they had this opportunity, right? But we found out that those were not only going to be short-lived and we would be servicing them, they were not the right computers. We didn't have the right servicing contracts, all that stuff, right? But the other part of it is that our PTO organizations sometimes want to fundraise for specific things that the school district or the school may not want to. And that is the autonomy of a PTO and a PTA, is to be able to fundraise for those things. And then the teachers, where I see it was, I agree, like there's a lot of things out there that you could get yourself in trouble with as a teacher that you don't know. So having those processes in place to make sure, but what if I'm a teacher that just started and I want to have a quick fundraiser before the school starts, and I want to be able to raise money for some cool project that I have in 3 months? I've got to go through this process with the principal and all that stuff, and then it just kind of dies. And I think there is some restriction there that occurs that might, you know, if there's a back door that we could figure out for that, that's all. Like if a PTO wants to raise money for something, I think they should be able to raise money for that through a crowdsource and not have to go through all of the different pieces. But at the same time, I can agree with some of the other stuff. So There's got to be a give and take there somewhere. Does that make sense? Am I hitting the right thing, or am I just running around in
Yeah, I
circles?
mean, and I don't know if this is a solution, but maybe like a dollar amount for the approval piece, you know, no one's going to buy a set of technology for under $500 or whatever, just to not take away that autonomy of that classroom teacher to fund a project that they want to fund. I know a lot of people use websites like that, and I feel very strongly that if they find out that they have to kind of go through this approval process and go through their principal, they may not go through that effort, because it's just another thing for them to do, so.
So I'll give you guys a great example of why I think we need this policy. A few years ago, I had one of my teachers that put out on GoFundMe a request for chairs with the comment that our district will not even provide chairs for our students, and so I'm coming to the community to request that you help me to buy chairs for my students so they have some place to sit. And that wasn't the case at all. The teacher had not requested chairs. Certainly, if they needed additional chairs for the classroom, we would have gotten those additional chairs for the classroom. And so I do think that there has to be some control over that process. I think there are lots of ways that people fundraise. PTOs, Matt, you mentioned, you know, they should have the freedom to fundraise. And technically, PTOs fundraisers should be approved by the principal. The PTO shouldn't be able to just go and fundraise for something that the school doesn't want, because then it becomes a liability for the principal and the school. So ideally, we have a collaborative relationship between PTO and principal, and they're working together. Because the truth of the matter is, we could have a teacher that crowdsources for a bounce house in her classroom, you know what I mean? And that's a safety issue. So I do think, I don't think it should be overly burdensome for them to go through an approval process. I think certainly it should be, you know, unless this request doesn't meet the requirements of the district safety and financial and all of those things, that it should be approved. But I can certainly see where we need to have some control over it. I think you're on the right path, Ms. Lisinski, with this recommendation. Couple of questions. Does this apply to, for example, an Amazon wish list, where a teacher puts together an Amazon wish list and people are allowed to purchase that and have it shipped to the school for the teacher?
I guess if they use one of those sites, yes. I mean, I'm used to, for my daughter, the teacher will say, here are the things that I need, and then I go out to the store and I buy it. But this would be really convenient for something like that as well.
So an Amazon wish list would also have to be approved under this policy?
Oh, no,
Because it's not crowdfunding necessarily, but it's similar to what we've done for years, right? The teacher says, here are the things we need for the
Right.
classroom. We go, we buy them, we send them into the classroom. So Amazon wish list would be excluded from this, even though it's an online.
I guess I need to understand if, and maybe Susan can help me, but if it's, you know, like donor's choice and then all the parents provide funding and then they send it, I would say that's donor's choice, or that goes with this policy. But I would think that if a teacher, you know, sent out, you know, something or met with everyone and said, hey, these are the things that I need, you know, and I think that's more prevalent in elementary. I don't think there's an issue with that.
So
Now I'm looking at Susan.
So the Amazon wish list is similar to, for example, if you've ever gone to a baby shower registry or a wedding registry, where somebody goes and they put all of the items on a list that they want, and then people can go to the store and get it.
Okay.
The Amazon wish list is the same thing, except they create a list on Amazon.com and send out the link to that, and then people can follow that link and go and order. And typically what you do is you just order the item and it automatically ships to the school.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that.
Okay.
We hadn't looked at that as part of crowdfunding, but we may need to. I know Donor's Choice allows you to pick from Amazon, and then they ship it a little different because it's separate.
Right.
I guess it gets to the point of if they just hand out a list and there's no verbiage on it saying I'm crowdfunding for this, it's a little different.
Well, and I think the difference would be that typically with the crowdfunding, like perhaps someone wants a $300 item for their classroom, and I might donate $10 toward that, and Katie donates $10, and Matt donates $10. Whereas typically on the Amazon wish list, you're purchasing an item, just like if you were to go to Target or Walmart and buy the item and send it in with your kid to the class.
Yeah,
So-
I would say that wouldn't be part of the crowdfunding, but we'd have to go back and take a look at that.
Okay.
I know when I was in Louisiana, it was really nice where school supplies, there was a site you went to and then you paid whatever the funding is and they sent exactly the school supplies for kindergarten to the school. And I thought that was very nice instead of me trying to figure out
Right?
that whole list at Walmart.
And it's a fundraiser. Those are fundraisers for the school as well.
Yeah, they make good money on that a lot of times. And then the only other thing that I would mention is in the 4th paragraph where it has FERPA and IDEA. We have an extra I in IDEA.
Okay, we'll fix that.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
So if we have an Amazon wish list that has a series of things, or we have a item that we want to have people purchase too, it's kind of the same thing in a way, right? So has there ever been a situation that we've had to discipline a teacher, or besides the chair thing? It's like, what is the fear behind this whole thing? Let's start there. So like, because where I find is that from a teacher's perspective, I appreciate the autonomy of trying to create something inside my classroom, and I'll tell you why. When I first started teaching, within the first 90 days, I put together a World War I reenactment battle that was the front page of the Florida Today, and I had 2 schools battling it out at the school. There was no way in heck that if I had to raise the money myself and do all that stuff and go through the process, it ever would have happened. And there's kids still today, almost 15 years later, that remember those moments and can tell you every single thing about World War I. So I think there's got to be a way here. There's got to be something we can do, maybe a pre-approved list of things that they can crowdfund to. Maybe there's something there. Like, I understand the thing, because we almost got an entire group of computers for a school that didn't need them, right? I get that. The chair thing, I get that. But teacher autonomy, being inside there's something there. So if we can try to figure something out, you know what I mean? Instead of just saying the principal will approve everything,
Right.
maybe give them a little bit, since we're giving them a little bit on the Amazon piece, maybe there's an approved list of things that if they don't conflict with technology or actual hardware inside the school, and you want to fundraise for something to enhance your school, maybe there's something there. I don't know. You guys are the experts.
Yeah, if jumping off of that, I mean, maybe some kind of verbiage. Well, first off, I guess the verbiage that doesn't sit well with me is the specific approval of the principal, taking away that autonomy from our teachers. It's already taken away so much from direction from the state every single year, so I don't want to take that away from them. There are amazing projects that are funded this way. Maybe some kind of language that has to do with, IT and technology. That's really probably the only thing that would really cause a problem that they would be funding for. Typically, these are small, specific projects, specific items. And there's obviously very popular websites. Like you had said, Donors Choose, you can only shop from specific lists, and it lists those specific items that those people are crowdfunding to, for that accountability, so that those people know where their money's going to. So, you also have to follow up with thank you letters and pictures of the items being physically in that classroom without the students' faces, in order for those donors to see that money is spent on those products. So, I'm with Mr. Susan. I don't really want to take away that autonomy from our teachers.
Ms. Belford.
Yeah.
I think I understand the concern that you guys are shared, but I think you're assuming that there's going to be a lot of no's. I think the purpose of this clause in here is to avoid the type of things that we've mentioned. And I'll just add another thought, and that is, for example, my daughter is in orchestra right now, and they're using a crowdfunding website that's, you put people's emails in, and then they've been sending out blasts saying, hey, please donate because we're planning on going on this trip next year. What if the teacher had not gone to the principal and let him know, hey, by the way, we're planning this trip next year? And people start getting emails, and I'm kind of restricted. I'm a Scrooge, and I tell my daughter, no, you can't give anybody else's email addresses out except for these, because I don't want all our friends thinking, oh my gosh, we're asking you for money all the time. That's the way our family runs. But if people start getting these email addresses and they call the school, and they're going to call the principal and say, did you know that and if the what I don't want is for our principals to get caught off guard and say, no, I didn't know they were doing the fundraiser. I didn't know they were going on the trip. I didn't know. Our principals should be aware of what's going on. If someone's unhappy because, even a teacher, a teacher doing a project for something like that. Sometimes people are wary of these websites, and if they're getting a link or information from a teacher or a staff member, hey, this is going out, I might call the school and say, hey, did you know, what is this? I don't want to click a link if it didn't really come from you, and we get somebody from the school saying, I don't have any idea what that is. That reflects poorly on the teacher, on the administrator, on the school, on the district as a whole. Just to have this one, hey, just run it by. This is not something our principals should be saying no, 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 no all the time, but just, again, to have that layer of, just awareness so that nobody's caught off guard. We don't have these surprises that are potential. And honestly, before we would move any further about the Amazon wish list, I would, not today, but probably next time, get Leading and Learning to weigh in on some of those things as well, to see what kind of problems could potentially be caused or have been caused in situations where people are doing wish lists. I don't have a problem with the wish list per se, but I think before we say, oh, no, there's not a problem, I think we need to find out if there has been a problem from Leading and Learning.
I would agree, Ms. Campbell, and I think that, we certainly doesn't hurt to investigate that, because there's the potential there, just like with crowdsourcing, I think, for somebody to unintentionally go rogue, if you will. So,
can I ask that we format this a little differently? As we've had new policies come in over the last couple of years, we've been trying to kind of format them similarly. I don't know if we have some numbers and letters or whatever as necessary, but
we can fix the formatting. And I'll just add, for all of this, it comes down to an auditing issue as well. If somebody's donating equipment to the district needs to take possession of that and inventory it properly. So if somebody's saying, here's a classroom set of computers, it needs to go through inventory and get inventoried properly. That's not, Mr. Susan's class set of computers that he's going to take home in the summer and do away. It was donated to the school. So there's also that tracking accountability that if 100 teachers in the district are out there raising, products and stuff for the district, it's district property as the policy states, so that it needs to be inventoried properly.
Can I say something? I think we are in a place where we keep saying, you were mentioning, we're assuming that there will be no's. We're concerned about people getting email addresses. We're avoiding, basically what we're doing is taking a professional that's has got a college degree, that is become a teacher of these students and takes that seriously, and then saying, well, we can't trust you, so we're going to make these rules and restrictions that are going to take away part of your autonomy because we're worried about people getting too many emails, or we're too worried about something that you might do. And I can agree with that. Like, we keep coming back to facilities, we keep coming back to property. Let's get there. Like, let's say if you're fundraising for hardware for the school, then there's a specific process that you need to ask. But if you're fundraising for materials that are going to enhance your class, I will tell you, probably 3/4 of the stuff that I did would never get approved. And I will tell you that it was the most successful teaching that I've ever seen, and I was a part of. So I just disagree. I would have gotten no's. I would have gotten them. And yet I had a lot of success inside my classroom. And the reason is I was given that autonomy. If I was put in a box, I never would have succeeded. I would have failed those kids. And you can call any of the kids that were inside my classrooms. It was engaging. It was right up front. And I just don't want to assume that for our teachers.
Ms. McDougall.
I have a question. I know that we had a problem a while back with gift cards. We had no accountability for gift cards. And that got us into some hot water. And I want to make sure that we do have a policy that will be transparent. So if I am a mother or father or whoever donating my money, that it's going to go where it's supposed to go. And I think this gives us some transparency. Again, Mr. Gibbs, what legal, you talked about audits. Would crowdfunding ever be audited? Would somebody say, hey, you raised this money, did it really go to where it was supposed to go?
I think it could pose a problem if it got, if an auditor found like a surge of, money or materials into a school and they say, hey, there's no PO here anywhere, there's nothing from the school, where did this come from? Is it properly tracked and, logged into as being received by the district, just like any other, if, a company, Northrop Grumman wants to donate a classroom set of stuff, that has a procedure. It comes in as a donation, it's received, and it's logged properly. If a classroom all of a sudden has a bunch of stuff, or a school gets that same donation from somebody in the public and nobody knew about it except the teacher, then it could look a little funny on somebody's audit sheets.
Well, I'm wondering, thank you, I appreciate that. Oh, I'm wondering do we want to put a set amount that, like an amount that, okay, let's say I needed, but of course this would be on a list, like I'm thinking of crayons, or I'm thinking more elementary school, that's what I'm thinking. Or like I want to do a science experiment, but I needed some other things. But it wouldn't be a huge amount. I guess I'm wondering, do we want to look at an amount to put a cap on to go to the principal? But I still get concerned that a principal wouldn't know what's going on crowdfunding-wise. I would. I think that I don't want to be blindsided as a principal that, wait a minute, oh, you're raising money for X, Y, and Z. I wish I had known that. Just food for thought.
Can I follow up? I'm with Mr. Susan on this. I feel like often we may not recognize the way that we speak about our classroom teachers and how it reflects when they hear it. We don't trust our educators to make the right decisions for what ifs that haven't really happened. We don't have a ton of examples to say that this has been like a really serious problem. My only issue is with that specific approval of the principal. Yes, we're assuming they're going to say no, but at the same time, then conversely, we're assuming they're going to say yes all the time. And I think the risk of a principal not knowing what they're crowdfunding for is not, it doesn't outweigh the benefit of that autonomy for that classroom teacher. I also kind of have to say that, our principals should be engaged in those classrooms, engaged with those teachers and knowing what's going on. That's kind of their job to manage. And so there should be that communication there, but I don't think that that principal should have the right to say yes or no for a specific classroom project, a specific lesson plan, or something that that teacher has planned for that classroom. And again, ultimately, it's going to restrict people using these sites, using this source to get materials for our students to have engaging academic lessons. So I just think that's really important for people to think about.
So I think one thing that we have to keep in mind is that when we give these examples of things that occur within our district, they certainly are the exceptions, but that is our role as a board, is to write policies to deal with exceptions, right? If everyone was doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing all the time, we wouldn't need policies to address it. And so I think we do have to consider the exceptions and the challenges that we've seen in developing the policy for the district. The majority of the teachers that I know are pretty passionate, and if they just went to the principal and said, hey, I'd like to do a crowdsourcing thing for this project in my classroom, not a huge deal, and certainly not something that's going to deter them. We have teachers doing phenomenal things in the classrooms all the time, and whether it's that they're sending home a list asking parents to send in egg cartons and spaghetti noodles, or whether they're crowdsourcing to get a beanbag chair in the classroom, they do great work and find ways to make those things happen. I struggle to think that a simple briefing of the principal, hey, is this okay, is going to necessarily deter them from doing those things. But I do think that clearly, as Paul mentioned, we've got some considerations with regard to some controls that we have to put in place, and that really is our role as a board. So I'm not opposed to, massaging language or setting dollar amount standards or any of those things, but I do think that we have to acknowledge the fact that our role as a governing board is to put policies in place to keep those things from happening that are the few and far between things that could really be a detriment to the district. Ms. Campbell?
I guess one more thing is when when it's one thing when materials go to the school or when a check goes to a school. We just, once that check goes, it should go to the school and now it becomes internal funds. So then we're supposed to manage that and make sure that we're accounting for all that funding that's coming in. So at this point, we don't know what kind of funding is coming through and we're not accounting for what schools are receiving. But don't get me wrong, I support this. What we want to do is support the teachers and the principals. We're not trying to, deter them from the great things that they do.
And just to jump on that cash part, if cash is going out, some crowdfunding it's like, how is it set up? Is it going through the school or the individual? Is that individual getting a $50,000 check and they're depositing it in their bank before they go out and buy the materials versus, giving it to the school and then the school buys the materials? So, I mean, I think it looks worse if, it's going through an individual and they're using their private accounts to do it rather than going through the school to do it. So there's also those controls to keep in mind.
Ms. Campbell, I think you had requested the mic.
Yeah, just two other things. One is let me start with this one. I just want to make it clear that as a former teacher myself, if I'm going to I did a bowl-a-thon one time. I was taking my kids, we were going to go bowling. We asked people to give $1 for every point, right? And some people were more successful than others. But I was happy to have the backup of my principal because of any question that might have there. It's just all clear and above board. It is not let's clamp down for me. And I thank you for expressing that feeling, Ms. Lisinski. It's not about clamping down on the creativity and the ingenuity and whatever of our teachers, but making sure they've got that backup, that support. When they go out to do whatever their project is, it is fully, supported by their principals. They're not out there alone. If somebody asks a question, they're not going to get in trouble. It is about having that backup. So I don't back off of that. I mean, that is, it's important for us all to be together on a team, and I think that this is an important part of it. And the other thing I would say is that as part of our policy that we just looked at, I don't know if it's not red line, so I'm assuming it was part of actually I'm looking at the wrong version. Actually, it's not part of the red line, so we've already had this in our student fundraising policy, is that the board recognizes the need for some constraint to prevent fundraising activities from becoming too numerous and overly demanding on employees, students, and the general public. And again, not one more reason for a principal to say no, but if these kinds of things are happening right and left, I will tell you as a parent in my first couple of years when my kids started school, like every week we started a new something or other. And again, that helps the principal to say, hey, we're wearing on our community, we're wearing on our parents, let's just be careful. All right, so there's this, I support it as it is with some formatting. But other than that, I think we're arguing over intent that's not actually there.
Can I respond?
Sure.
So you had mentioned in there about your bowling and everything else, and what I would like to mention to the first point, number one, is that I think we can accomplish both. I don't think that Ms. Jenkins and any of us are up here saying, let's just open the floodgates, let's go. But what we're trying to say is that I think there's a happy medium. So opposed to going through and having a process where everything has to go through the principal, everything has to be, that restricts the autonomy of the teacher, I feel that there should be a happy medium. So maybe there's some language where we talk about the things, we look at what has happened in the past that has caused this to come forward, and then create the restrictions based around what the cause was, not what we think it might be. So Ms. Belford, you had mentioned that we want to do policies based upon the fact that of what we have, we want to govern over those instances that happen. Let's look at those specific instances. If they're related to materials, computers, that kind of stuff, then let's restrict that portion of it. But let's give the teachers a little bit of autonomy. And there was, the next piece that you had mentioned was that recognize the restraint and overbearing, wearing out on our community. Yeah, there is that. There's also a situation that occurs in some of the schools where one person is allowed to run the fundraisers and everything else, and the other people that may want to try to, which it may not be part of that entire plan, are not allowed to. They're just told no. And I've been in situations where I want to do a fundraiser, I want to get moving, but the district will say, or the school will say, well, we're worn out. We don't have time. We're not going to put the energy towards that, right? Or they tell you that, well, we've asked the community for too much money. And I really think that's unfair. I do. And I've been in Port St. John. So I taught in Port St. John. There's like 5 businesses in all of Port St. John. And they get hit all day long for fundraisers. They just do. There is no business base minus legitimately 20 or 30. But every one of the people that work there have small businesses, and those are the guys that do it. But if there's a good idea, there needs to be a teacher autonomy to be able to do that within restrictions that are based upon what we've already had issues with. I think we can all agree on a happy medium. But just going all the way over here and saying that we're going to create this thing with no restrictions or no policy avenues for autonomy, I don't think is the right choice. I think there's a happy medium here. That's all. And I am finished.
Anyone else? Ms. Jenkins?
No, I was shutting my mic.
Sorry, I can't see your face. I
I'm
can only see
sorry.
your
I
hand
didn't
go.
realize it was on the whole time.
Okay.
Ms. Belford, I believe, and I'm recalling memory from a while ago as a principal, but I believe there may be some Red Book guidance that provides some clarity of what flexibility the board may have in this policy to adhere to and comply to Red Book. So we could certainly look at that and provide it for the board's review and any additional consideration, or if it provides for additional consideration moving forward. But as a work session, we certainly need guidance from the board what to pursue next to bring to the workshop.
So, Mr. Susan, do you have specific language requests that you would like for us to weigh in on?
I would like to take a look at every one of the instances that we've had where there's been a situation with the crowdfunding that we didn't think was good for the district. And then I would try to bring those back and wrap a policy based around what we actually have had problems with. So if we have a policy with raising money for hardware, raising money for stuff inside the classroom, seats, whatever it is, let's restrict that. Let's say that you can't fundraise for that. But if there's an autonomy piece where they want to fundraise for an entire year's worth of great policy or great engagement with students, we need to be able to do that. That's all. And I mean, you can put up a list of 100 things and say that they need to all be purchased, or you can crowdfund for all of these things and then go take care of it. We already give the teachers stipend every year to go purchase a series of things, and then they got to provide the receipts. It's the same thing. It's the same policy. So that's all. That's what I would mention to do with the right process, if that makes sense.
So I have some, first of all, I question how we are going to identify every issue that we have ever had in the district with crowdsourcing. I think that is going to require an enormous amount of work on the parts of our team members I don't even know how you find out that information other than going to each individual principal and clarifying what challenges we're looking for. I think too, so putting language in there or removing language that requires them to have approval in crowdfunding, but maintaining language that requires them to have approval for other fundraisers, to me seems odd. Like, we're not going to let students go out and do a fundraiser without principal approval. We don't let PTOs do fundraisers without principal approval. And we don't let teachers do fundraisers within the classroom without principal approval. So I guess I'm struggling with the inconsistency between the two approaches, if you will, as well as the inconsistency with the Amazon wish list and all of those things and making sure that they're tracked. But I guess I question why this particular one approval is a problem. I don't know. That's just my thoughts, and I will certainly share the mic with whoever wants it.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
I can tell you why it's an issue for me, because students aren't professionals in the classroom and PTOs aren't professionals in the classroom. Teachers are. And so that's why it bothers me, because it's taking away that professionalism piece. It's taking away that autonomy piece. I don't think it needs to be as specific as finding all the issues and figuring out why there were issues. I will say, though, if we can't figure it out, then they probably weren't really issues in the first place. It would have been easier to find them. But you know, some sort of language, maybe someone who's craftier with words than me, but where, you know, if it's something that is specific to, that the classroom teacher is going to use for a specific lesson or a specific instruction or project in their classroom, that doesn't need approval from a principal. It's the same thing if I went out and spent that money myself to buy all those supplies. If it's, you know, I don't know, Russell will have craftier language, but, you know, talking about our technology piece, something that has to be linked to our network, then that needs specific approval from IT. I think we can come up with crafty language. Again, it doesn't seem like a very big deal, and I know sometimes people forget this, but we have 4,000 teachers, and not everyone is a type A personality, and not everyone gets along with their administrator or vice versa. And I just feel like we're putting barriers in place for our students to access really awesome experiences for no reason. So there has to be a creative way for us to say, if it's specifically for this classroom, for a lesson, for a project, that doesn't need a principal approval. And technically, that shouldn't be some exorbitant amount of money anyway.
I like where Ms. Jenkins is going with that, because I'm wondering, can someone remind me what the stipend is for the teachers to buy supplies?
It's $280 about. Well, no, it went up over 300 this year, I think.
So 300. So would it be out of the realm of saying anything under this for your classroom instruction? You know, does it need to be? But I get concerned, Mr. Gibbs, do we track this? Would we be tracking this, this $300? I mean, I'm just curious about that.
Receipts for all purchases to, you know, to qualify for that $300. Crowdfunding, I think, is a little different. If you're out there and you're putting on the internet, I work at, you know, O'Galley High School. I'm raising funds for. You are now raising funds for the district. You are advertising it for the district. That teacher that's going out and spending $300 that they get from the district on their own at stores is not out there. I'm with a sign. I'm going around for O'Galley High School buying all these science supplies so I can do a science experiment in class. Or even if they get on Amazon, they're not on Amazon as an O'Galley High School student or teacher buying supplies for that class. They are putting it out on the internet for the entire world to see. O'Galley High School is raising money for this project, so I can see where, and it's up to the board again, I can see where, you know, a little bit of what are we out there for, you know, gathering supplies and donations, having a little bit of control there, even if it is the $300. And there might be that interest in the board to say, you know, somebody needs to be saying yes or no as far as what we're putting on the internet to raise money for or get supplies for. If the name is left off and, you know, there's no ties to the district whatsoever, then maybe you can take it off. And right now, that's what it's the Wild West. Does anybody have any idea what, if you go search Google, crowdfunding for Brevard schools, you can probably find all kinds of stuff that, you know, nobody knows what's going on and what's being asked for. And, you know, 99% of it's probably nothing, and if not more. It might be 100% of just, I need extra books for reading in my kindergarten class or something. Or I want to buy the Bob book set. But overall, it's like, if it's using the school district's name, then I would say you might want to consider having some sort of, you know, control over what you're asking for as a district.
And I believe that's what's, if memory serves, I believe that's what the Red Book references, is if fundraising is done in the name of the school or the district, that it requires principal oversight. I believe that's, but we'd have to review it. So I just.
Okay.
So could I make a recommendation in order to move us forward, that perhaps we review the Red Book language and share that with the board prior to the next workshop? And then, Mr. Susan and Ms. Jenkins, if you have specific language requests that you would like to be considered, can they get with you on that, Paul, and see if it's,
We can add it in there. If it changes at the next meeting, we have to re-advertise. So I don't know if you just want to pull this and push it further so that it can be discussed more. That's fine, because yeah, it sounds like this is going to go past the next work session, and any changes after that, we got to re-advertise anyway.
so can we have Mr. Susan and Ms. Jenkins get with you on the language changes that they would like, and then you can,
Yeah, we can try and work around, and once we get the Red Book language,
okay.
we'll work with them to see what language they want.
Before I get pushed to do something, what I would like to do is every time we ever come up with a policy, we're always saying that we should not be directing staff to do certain languages. We always say, hey, here's what we're trying to figure out. Why don't you guys bring back a recommendation? You know what I mean? So me directing staff to say, make sure that IT and all of that, I don't think that's the right direction from our governance perspective. I think the right governance perspective would be what issues could pertain a risk to our school district if we crowdfunded, and let's start wrapping that band around there, because obviously there was no true red flag that occurred that we can draw back to say those are the ones, but maybe the principals can say, look, we don't care if anybody crowdfunds up to $500 for supplies in the room. We're just concerned about somebody going crowdfunding for computers or anything like that. You know what I mean? So I would give direction to having input from staff over what it is that could be potentially the issues and where they feel comfortable with having crowdsourcing up to. Does that make sense? I don't think I should go to her and say, okay, here's what I think it should have inside there, because then that's going to go, that's not the right policy. We've never said that before.
No, but my point is, I think it's important for them to understand what your specific concerns are and what her specific
Okay.
concerns are.
To bring back a recommendation.
So that we can start working through that,
Okay.
because I feel like, Ms. Campbell, you're good with where it is right now, right? I'm good with where it is. Ms. McDougall, I feel like you're good with where it is. So the two of you who would like to see language changes, I feel like you need to give them additional clarity on what you would like for that to look like, so there can be consideration, because,
Okay, I'll ask some people and then I'll get with them.
okay.
I'll do some data mining.
Can I just ask one question? I don't know if this would be the appropriate place for it, or maybe it's kind of already covered there where it says all fiscal transactions shall comply with appropriate board policies, but should there be something in there, though, where, you know, the receipts of that are required to be handed over to the district? Because if it becomes district property, then at some point, they need to know what was purchased, right?
From a crowdfunding site?
Right, so for instance, I go to Donors Choose, I get a $500 project funded, they give me an itemized list of all of the things that were sent to us and the cost of it all. I have to hand that over to the school system because it is now their property.
That would be a proper accounting procedure, yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if that's supposed to be in here or if it's somewhere else, but just wanted to throw that out there.
We can, if you want it in there, I thought it referenced internal procedures. That might be in those internal
Okay.
procedures.
Thanks.
And I'm guessing that in the event that someone went to the principal and said, I would like to do this funding, they would be directed to the proper procedures to make sure that all of that was addressed?
Yeah, I would hope that that's where principals are. That would come down to a training, you know, if you've got crowdfunding going on, make sure you're referring them to the proper procedures and everything, and they have to turn everything over to the district and that provide the proper receipts and all that. Like I said, the issue is the biggest issue for me from a legal side is who gets the checks, you know, especially for big projects. You know, if it's like $100 for crayons in a classroom, it's probably not going to be, you know, national security issue. If somebody's raising $10,000 for a trip or something, and that teacher is getting the check mailed to their home, that's a bigger issue.
Right. And not on topic of this policy directly, but Ms. McDougall brought up the gift card nightmare. I do believe that we have changed policy to prohibit donation of gift cards, have we not?
I don't know that we've outright prohibited them. We prohibited them in certain circumstances. The big issue was with volunteer hours, as
Okay.
I recall from when I started.
Yes.
And those, you can't buy your volunteer hours using gift cards anymore. And there was an issue with tracking gift cards. So if somebody donates gift cards, it has to be tracked on the accounting forms properly, and that was not being done in at least one case.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gibbs.
Ms. Belford?
Yes.
Just for a matter of process, and hopefully to be considerate of time, if I may request, direct Ms. Lisinski, if you will please work with your staff to identify any red book language that references fundraising that would apply to crowd raising, forward it to Mr. Gibbs for his legal review interpretation, to then have it provided to the board for review and consideration prior to necessarily going to staff, any additional staff members and that sort of thing. I think that would be the first step to make sure that we're not going down a path or engaging in conversation that is not necessarily efficient use of time. And I believe we could have that to the board no later than the end of next week, if that is satisfactory to the board.
For anyone who couldn't see us, he just got thumbs up from the board members on that recommendation. You go with that,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Gibbs?
Yeah, that's fine. Do you want it to try and come to the next as scheduled, or just pull it? Pull it? Okay.
Please, sir.
Do you want to pull the student fundraising since it references that policy and procedures?
Because I got to look at the numbers.
So actually, can we back that up and say, if the red book language comes back and doesn't provide wiggle room on the approval, how soon do we have to make the decision on pulling it?
We're already advertised, so we've already
Okay.
paid for it, so we'd have to pay for it again. So we can try and bring it to the next meeting, and if there's any changes, we're going to have to re-advertise.
Right. Okay, so hopefully we can work offline and get this resolved prior to the next meeting so that we don't have to pull it, and that will mean we don't have to pull the student fundraising as well, Ms. Moore.
So you're saying that because he's going to find a red book that says that permission to the principal, that we would just continue to go down and negate any of the other stuff we talked about? Is that-
No, what I'm saying is, it's already been advertised to be discussed at the next meeting, so there's no point in us making a decision right now to pull it. We may as well wait and see what comes of the guidance that we're gonna get, and if we're not able to do any of the things that you're requesting us to do, then
But you have to, if any change at all, you have to re-advertise.
After that next meeting, yeah, but we've already advertised, so if we pull it, we're going to have to re-advertise. We're not saving the advertisement cost.
Can I ask a question? Is it typical procedure that when we review a policy in a workshop, it's immediately presented in the next meeting and we're already advertising for it? Because that seems kind of like a really bad financial choice. I don't understand why we would do that. Is that typical, or is that just because of this one?
That's the way it's worked since I've been here.
So, I mean, that's just like assuming there's never going to be changes or
Well,
waiting.
now, you can change this meeting. This meeting, you guys could say, hey, we want this added here, that added there. But at the next meeting, when it's a public hearing, that's your first public hearing, and you have to have two. So that's your cutoff. So we can make changes up till the next meeting. But if we come to that next work session, you guys say, we don't like that section, we want it to be worded this way, or add that caveat, and we have to change it, we have to re-advertise and restart the cycle.
So the issue would be that I'm going to go in the next 2 weeks, data mine through individuals, talk to some teachers, talk to some principals, talk to some people, somehow formulate a thought process around what we're doing, bring it back to staff, talk to staff, who's then going to evaluate it, and then figure out if, at that point, we're going to change it before we bring it to the board for conversation. Does that make sense? It's kind of like saying, because what we find out might be, hey, there's a great solution here. So, but I don't know if my other board members even care to hear it.
Right.
So, do you see what I mean? It does not give us the opportunity to discuss any of the changes, and I really want to try to give some autonomy here.
I think the point is, Mr. Susan, that it's already advertised for the next meeting, so whether we pull it or we leave it for the next meeting, we're either going to have discussion around it like we're doing today at the next meeting, or we're going to approve the policy as presented at the next meeting. But because it's already been advertised, it doesn't matter either way. we may as well
Okay.
leave it and then, because if we pull it now, then Pam's gonna have to re-advertise for that meeting.
Right.
So then we're double paying to re-advertise for the meeting coming up as well as to re-advertise for another meeting on this policy,
Right.
correct?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any changes, you're going to re-advertise. So, I mean, it can be on the agenda, and if you guys aren't happy with the recommendation or make changes to the recommendation, we'll just put it on a new cycle and bring it back.
Okay. That is going to move us along to Russ Bruin, Chief Strategic Communications Officer, with executive summary to the proposed revisions in policy 8330, student records.
This policy is being revised to clarify the procedures regarding student directory information and other changes in compliance with Florida law. Particular areas of revision include the following: student information listed as public record and the cost to produce that information upon request. Certain proposed revisions you'll see encompass the suggested language from Neola. The first thing I want to direct your attention to is on the red line copy, page 4, it should be. We did add the copy rate to this policy of 15 cents per copied page, which is our going rate, and labor costs begin after 15 minutes of work, which is also in line with what we do for public records requests. Before now, that was not filled in. And then page second, the second part of that is page 7, excuse me, under the directory information. You see letters A through K, and they list student information. We did take out the date and place of birth to eliminate that. Everything else was kept as is. And for the most part, the rest of the red line is just moving information around based on Neola.
We did add statutory language about the transfer of student records as it pertained to threat assessment records and any mental health records that we might be developing as an educational record in our schools.
Anyone have questions for Mr. Bruin, Ms. Campbell?
So thank you for taking a look at this. This was my original request. Just to clarify for the board, my issue is with the director information. I'd like us to be more specific on the language surrounding this, because basically what the statutes say is that we as a school district can designate any or all of this directory information when it comes to the, I think it's the freedom or the PIA, something about
FERPA.
FERPA.
Yeah, FERPA, but also Public Information Act, right? People can request. But we as a district can set which directory information, and it can be more extensive. It can include date and place of birth, or it can limit that. We can limit any of these. But I don't know if we need to fix it in policy, or we need to fix it in procedure. I feel like it needs to be, at least in part in policy, that there are, the form that comes out of this policy, right, is the directory information form that parents get at the beginning of the year. And basically what parents are often feeling like, and I felt like myself, is that it's an all or nothing. Either my child is in the yearbook and anybody can walk in and ask for this information, or I don't want people asking for that information. That means they also can't be in the yearbook, or on social media posts or any other newsletters or whatever. And there needs to be, and there are in some other districts, at least one more option. And there are other options. There's one about the military, either because the law requires that we share that information unless the parents say, no, don't give my child's information in the military, and then post-secondary institutions, I think. But there needs to be something that parents can choose, saying, yes, I want my child's photo and their name in the yearbook. But if someone comes and says, I would like the names of all the sixth graders in the south end of the county, names and addresses, they said, nope, I want to opt out of that. So for whatever reason. Now, I understand from, I think the conversation I had with Russ or Paul, I can't remember, that if someone comes in, we have absolutely no reason why, don't we have some limitations? We can say, if it seems a little wonky, we don't have to comply. if it seems a little odd. And I don't think we can but give lists to like advertisers or whatever, but there just needs to be something besides an all or nothing approach to the director information, because information nowadays, especially, you can get into identity issues with even just, well, without the date, the birth date, you probably can't, but you can get into with some of the information that we have here. So can we do something in policy to change that?
And we do restrict the commercial. I think that's what you were referring to.
Right, but
Like,
not
we
just
do not provide to commercial entities. Yeah.
Right, but not just commercial. I mean, they're just, some parents is like, I don't want my, so schools used to, I don't know any school that does it now, they used to do like a directory when I first started. Our school sent a directory, so they sent out a directory that had the names and phone numbers of all the students, so parents could have it. So you could get to know if you need to call somebody, hey, I didn't know the number of somebody else who's in my child's class, but I want to know, hey, what was the homework because my kid forgot? Or can you give me a right? But hardly anybody does that anymore. But this would allow that kind of thing. Well, maybe people, like I said, most parents don't have a problem, with the picture and the name in our documents, in our newsletters, in our yearbooks, and even social media. And we have a photo thing that's separate from the directory information. I think it's a separate side of that form. But where can we put that? I don't want if I'm an athlete, whatever. But there just needs to be levels, because most parents don't want this other information, specifically address, phone number, given out to anybody except for the schools. And can we put that in there? What can we do?
I mean, I think we could.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say my recommendation, I think you're on the right track when you say there's a form we fill out that adds and takes away from what's shared. The difficult part about us changing the directory information in the policy is unintended consequences. Okay. Every year we get requests by legislators for the names and addresses of our graduates, and they get sent a letter from them. Every year, let me rephrase, daily, we get requests from DCF to talk about students' attendance. So we want to be careful that our partnering agencies aren't restricted from the data that they need and that they have the right to as directory information. We want to make sure that we are fully aware if we exclude some items from directory that there are people who access it for good and well-intended reasons. And I like the idea of taking a look at our form, making it more clear, giving parents more information about, this is how the data is used, and this is what we can exclude. And we can do that outside of policy, and we'll be happy to do that, especially as we're moving toward an online registration. But if you wanted to craft that language in policy, this is one of the things that the three of us all spoke about, is how do you write limiting language in policy and not scoop up some unintended consequences where somebody else is going to come to you and say, but you did this and you didn't realize you did this. So just from my perspective, I like your recommendation of moving forward with looking at the actual piece of paper that the parent sees, giving them the choice to really understand what's going on, and giving them the option to provide directory information much more specifically than it's written out in the policy.
Well, I appreciate that. Of course, I'm thinking of one particular instance that's happened in the last year where parents were completely up in arms, and without going into details, it actually was a legitimate request. But then all of a sudden everybody was alerted to, and of course they missed some of the things, like, you can know my child's height and weight. I'm like, the school, if your baby is in second grade, the school does not know their height and weight. They don't hang up. That's for the athletes, and it says specifically there, that's for athletes. Those are for programs, wrestlers and football players, they put that stuff in there. But it just made people aware that, oh my gosh, my child, people could come and find out where my child lives, and they're worried about stalkers, they're worried about, sexual offenders, they're worried about whatever. And so I think it needs, yes, any kind of information needs to be very clear what we're using for. One of the forms, I think Pam did research for me several months ago from another school district. It had out beside each one of those things how it potentially would be used.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at all of our forms as we start working with ET, and I'm hesitant to say too much. One, because they're all sitting behind me, but two, because I don't know the timeline. But those forms will be part of an online registration, and so we are looking and reviewing at all of those forms. So that's an easy ask, and it's absolutely doable. Okay. I would say, just for everybody's clarification, when there's a records request, it doesn't require us to create a record that doesn't exist. So, for example, when you talk about height and weight, that record doesn't exist within the AS400 platform. We're not generating a record. We would never be able to do that. We would deny it. Those records exist within athletics if a recruiter is coming to look and they want to see all your kids that are over 6'5" and 250 pounds, kind of thing. And it would go directly to the athletic director, would never even touch us up here in all likelihood. So because it exists doesn't mean it exists in a format that we can generate a record for it. And that's important information, especially as parents read this. Again, I balance safety, and that's part of, when we looked at the PII that exists and we took off the date and place of birth, we did that for PII reasons and identity theft reasons, but we balance safety with the functionality of us as an organization and as other organizations partnering with us to do their jobs. So again, we can add whatever verbiage you would like that kind of tightens this policy up. My caution is it may have unintended consequences. I'd really like to leave that decision-making in our parents' hands, and if they choose not to provide our local legislators with their name and address of their graduate because they don't want that certificate, that letter of congratulations, I think that's a parent's choice.
Okay. Well, again, and if they have the option of saying, I don't want the letter from my delegate, but I want to still be in the yearbook. Right now, they can't.
Right.
Tick. It's all enough. And so definitely want to see that in the form. And I appreciate you taking the date and place of birth off of there. That was a particularly alarming one for some people. But so I get it, and I hear you. I guess when it comes to things like DCF and some of the other that you referenced, do they not have other legal recourse to get that information without it being through directory information?
Subpoena.
A court order is what I was going to say. A court order.
Right.
They would need a subpoena. So if you take, and we went over that when we met, if we take the address off, Chris was raising we get these DCF, and I told him they're going to have to bring a subpoena.
To do something that we're asked, to well check something.
If we take it off of our definition of employee or directory information for students, they need a subpoena to gather education records.
Do we run into that problem when parents have opted out of everything?
Very few parents opt out of everything, or very few parents opt out of very little. But mostly, to be frank, mostly DCF doesn't ask us for addresses. They have the addresses. They ask for what's going on in the school when they come to visit us and whether they're in attendance and what school. Quite frankly, they ask us often what school they're in. Law enforcement is the agency that comes to us and says, what address do you have for this child?
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything else on this policy? So, Ms. Moore, I'm envisioning, how we get the health form and we can choose to have vision and hearing done, but not height and weight, or we can choose to have height and weight, but not vision or hearing. So are you envisioning the same type thing with the directory information where parents would?
Yeah, I'm envisioning the same exact type thing, but with a I don't want to say a disclaimer, but a description to the side of what those things are typically used for.
or who might typically ask for them. You know, I don't, again, until you have a parent, I don't think you know that a legislator sends you until you have a senior, you don't know that a legislator sends you a congratulations on your graduate, I'm really proud, and I represent the state kind of letter. So I think that I see exactly what you're talking about with maybe a little explanation on the side. And of course, all of that then, and again, I'm going to look back at my ET friends, all of that then has to be programmed into whatever new platform we have moving forward, student information system, so that when those records are pulled, it checks all the buttons and it doesn't pull records for those students in those categories. We're in the right place, the right time to be doing that work.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else?
I was just gonna double down on that, what Ms. Moore said, but it's basically gonna come down to whatever data manager we have and its capabilities, and then the amount of effort and time it would take those input clerks to be able to process that information.
And that's the beauty of a online registration system with a new SIS, is that parents will be entering that data.
Yeah. And they'll be held responsible for the data that they enter, as opposed to our team members who, yeah, absolutely.
Having to read people's handwriting.
Yes. All right, our last policy for this work session is policy 3215, tobacco-free environment. Ms. Moore, will you please provide us the executive summary?
Sure. 3215, tobacco-free environment. This policy is being revised to clarify the procedures regarding tobacco-free environment and other changes in compliance with applicable Florida law. Particular areas of revision include the following: updating the title, adding definitions, clarifying the responsibilities of administrators, and disciplinary actions for both student and employee violations. These proposed revisions encompass the suggested language from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, and these proposed revisions encompass the suggested language from Neola. This policy has an interesting history, and we actually had to go back and do a timeline of events to figure out what was going on with this policy. You'll notice the policy, the original policy that it references, looks very little like the policy that's redlined and presented to you today. And we had to go back to 2011 to figure out where some of the language from this policy came from. It was actually sent to us by Tobacco Free Florida, and it was listed as the Brevard Public Schools policy, and it wasn't the policy on our website. And we looked at it and we went, this looks good, we like it, and we all had a hazy memory of us enacting it. We remember as principals saying, no, you're not allowed to smoke anywhere on our campuses anymore. We remember putting up the signs, so we remembered enacting it, but it was nowhere on our website. And so we had to go back and figure out what happened. And so I could go through the timeline with you guys, but basically in 2011, then Governor Rick Scott signed a law. It was the Florida Clean Air Act, and it gave school boards the authority to designate district properties as tobacco-free. And as we go through time, CDC defined the 12 components associated with comprehensive tobacco-free school policy, and then they began working with school districts to enact those things. When we get to 2015 is where everything gets a little, I'm going to use the word wonky because I have no better word, and memos started going out to our schools saying, this is what we're doing. They may have even used the word policy within those memos, and the people who wrote those memos no longer work in Brevard Public Schools, so it's kind of hard to track back and go, what was going on here? As best we can tell, the board approved the policy that you see in front of you, the original version, and all of the other pieces were written as procedures and memos to schools, but Tobacco Free Florida believed all of that to be policy, and they have been using that as Brevard Public Schools policy ever since. We reviewed all of that together, and we took a look and said, this is what we know CDC recommends for a school board policy for tobacco recommendations for a comprehensive tobacco-free school policy. And we went, it's good stuff. And then we looked looked at the Neola language, and we decided to put before you a policy that incorporates all of that. Nothing in the policy changes how we have been acting, because we have all been acting and enforcing the policy that went out through memos in 2015. This language in this policy just enshrines that language as policy if you choose to move in that direction.
Questions or comments on the policy for Ms. Moore, Ms. Campbell?
So on the new policy, or on the red line version, or the clean version, it doesn't matter. C3, I'm just going to go clean because it's clear. C3 about imitation tobacco product, and it just pardon my ignorance because this is not the world that I live in regularly. The bubble gum and the shredded beef jerky into snuff tins and things like that. It gives a definition. And then in exceptions, in E1, it says, it shall not be a violation of this policy for tobacco products, related devices, imitation tobacco products, which have been defined, to be included in instructional or work-related activities, school buildings, probably needs to be some punctuation right there, or work-related activities, school buildings, if the activity is conducted by an employer and approved visitor and the activity does not include smoking, chewing, or otherwise ingesting the product. So is again, not my world, do we not allow baseball players, for example, to use shredded beef jerky or imitation?
It's on my list to talk about.
Do we not allow that now?
We don't allow that now.
We don't?
No, we don't allow it. We don't allow any imitation tobacco product to be used. So if it is, and I don't know in particular the shredded beef jerky in containers resembling snuff tins. I've never seen it. I've only seen it in like pouches. It is that it looks like a snuff tin and it's put in the back pocket of a baseball player to look like a snuff tin, and we don't allow that.
Okay.
Currently.
I mean, clearly, Big Chew or whatever the bubble gum thing is bubble gum. I mean, you have to say, if you were chewing, you'd have to say, open your mouth and let me see it to see that it's pink. But so I kind of understand. I just wondered if that was what we're already doing or if we were further restricting that.
No, we currently, as part of the memos that went out in 2015, said no imitation. We're not going to let toys and gum and candy for kids to allow them to pretend that they are tobacco products.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And that's what the guidelines in the CDC say basically is we don't want kids going around pretending to smoke bubblegum cigarettes because it's cool to smoke bubblegum cigarettes, which leads to, well, it's cool to smoke cigarettes.
I'll wait for the others.
Anyone else have anything on this one? Mr. Susan?
Okay, so when I was looking at this, one of the things that I looked at was the district school-sponsored events and activities, right? So I'm a sponsor, I'm a volunteer, I'm a student. We go to another place that allows alcohol, smoking, whatever that is. While we're there, not the people that are part of this, but maybe a parent over here or something over there does something like that. We are not saying that they can't do that. It's just the individuals that are involved in the activity as a volunteer, as a sponsor, as a teacher, and as a student or something, right?
Correct. Let me give you an example. So we used to be invited to Daytona 500 to participate in a fundraising activity up there. And our groups would go up there. They would do the fundraising activity. Certainly, we all are familiar with Daytona 500. I imagine there were people smoking. I imagine there was beer vendors there.
Yep.
The coach, the sponsors, the kids, they were not allowed to participate in any of that, but we had no control over the people that were around them. I will tell you that that fundraiser was ended because of that influence, but to your point, yeah, we wouldn't control the other people around them.
That's what I did with the football team at Space Coast, was that exact fundraiser, and it was the largest fundraiser we got. Was we would work it, and it was an incredible opportunity for our kids to get into a game or a race and everything else. Can we reinstitute that?
We did, let me rephrase. We, the district, didn't. We, Chris Moore, where I was principal, did. So we, the school district, didn't. The big we. The little we, Chris Moore, when I was the principal at Bayside High School, said, yeah, we're not going to do that as long as I'm principal here.
Yeah.
So I imagine that has already been changed, if that helps.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make sure, because we raised like $10,000 in a day for our school. It was incredible. And we couldn't do anything else like.
Big
And
fundraiser.
we never had an issue where our people were. So we're allowed to do that right now. There's no district policy against it.
Correct.
Just if you have
Correct.
somebody in your school. Okay.
Correct.
Shredded bubble gum. Is that really? I mean, I don't think shredded, here's my thing, is I used to chew shredded bubble gum, not because it was a pouch, not because it looked like it, but because it's just a massive amount of bubble gum. And I'm a big guy, and those little sticks really sucked. Do you guys have any appetite for taking that one out? Not at all?
Buy some bubble tape.
What's that?
Buy some bubble tape. Take a bite.
It's different. The shredded is much better. The outside's coated a lot better. It's a whole nother, all right, I guess that's done. It is. It's truly, it's a much better product. I'll tell you that much.
And I hate beef jerky, but I had a question about that one, so.
Well, the beef jerky thing I can understand, because it does. It looks like if the kid's outside there and he's got it in his back pocket, I can see that. All right, so.
So I just heard, I don't,
You just
did I
got rid of it?
understand the language is to take out from the group is to take out shredded bubble
No.
gum resembling chewing
No,
tobacco?
they don't want to do it at all. I'm 1-4
Oh,
on
okay,
this.
thank you. Okay, I
Yeah.
wasn't sure what I heard
Yeah,
up there.
this is
Thank you.
1-4 right now. I'm losing that one. All right, so J1C, administrators may offer violators alternative to suspension to include but not limited to corrective strategies such as referrals, local youth cessation programs, and/or services. So what I'm hearing you say is that if a kid is caught with or smoking, that we give them an alternative to, as opposed to being suspended or expelled. Is that true?
There, within our discipline policies, there are different corrective strategies.
Okay. And then I just want to tell you, I absolutely love K. Like, love it. It says that we have to review this policy every 3 years. And I would love to do that on every single policy to make us review them. Seriously, if there was a scope where we could put that in, I would love that. So.
Mr. Susan, we have a schedule to review all of our policies
Yeah,
every
we
year.
do. Well, that- we do. But the bottom line is that our board is a whole lot different than the previous boards. And what may happen going forward may not be what we do. And I would love, I'm not saying that that is deficient on us. I'm saying I love that because that would set forward a policy renewal process for all of our policies moving forward.
And I did question that, what the timeline for 3 years was, and the concern, and this was one of the recommendations from the CDC, was that tobacco companies and companies that produce products that children can get addicted to, they change quickly, and they're always ahead of us. And so we need to be ready to respond for the safety and health of our kids.
It was awesome. I love that. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything on this policy? Going once, going twice. Thank you, Ms. Moore. All right, that's going to conclude our policy work session, move us into the educational technology plan update, which will be facilitated by Russell Cheatham, Assistant Superintendent of Educational Technology. Oh, and look, he just came out of the back room like he heard us talking about him.
I'm going to take a break.
So patient.
First, let me ask, do all the board members have a copy of the technology plan? Do you have a copy of the book? Then I want to be sensitive to time. Dr. Mullins, board chair, how are we on time? What
Plenty
I
of
need
time
to-
to just take as long as you need until 5:30.
Yeah.
5:25, so that we have time for bathroom break. Just.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the ET technology plan. I know this excites you guys. So today the goal is to give you a very high-level overview of the technology plan, the booklet that you have in front of you. Why do we do a technology plan? Because it's important to have a formal plan that communicates with our community the goals that we set for supporting our students. It also provides transparent communication to our community. It talks about the impact that technology has on learning, as well as supports technology funding requests. Before I move forward, I want to introduce the four folks in front of you right now. We have Dr. Dawn Bronstein. She leads our instructional technology and customer service group. That's our teacher integrators, our help desk, those teams. Mr. Barrett Pucius, information technology. He leads our techs at our school sites, also our network group here at the district office. Mr. Chris Alt, down on the end. He leads our TSS team, our technology repair group. He also heads most of our special technology projects. This includes a lot of surtax projects. You know, there are a lot of projects that, although they're not in ET, naturally ET is a big part of them. So Chris is kind of that liaison between a lot of the departments to make sure that the technology aspect of our projects are okay. And then Mr. Randy George, closest to me, he's over our management information systems group. These are systems analysts, our programmers. They run our core systems, student systems, business systems, payroll, FTE, all those things. His group is responsible for that. Also the computer operators, the folks that keep the systems running late at night as well. So alignment is very important. So I want to be very clear that our technology plan does align with the district strategic plan. That is step one when we take on this process, is to make sure that we have good alignment with the strategic plan as we move forward with our technology plan. In order to write a technology plan, we have to use a lot of data sources. In this slide, we include several sources that we use, several surveys, Speak Up survey. We survey our technology specialists at the schools. We do a leadership conference survey each year. We also look at statistics from several systems that we use, whether it's ClassLink, our grade book. When you go into those systems, we can see the usage for different tools that are used by our students, by our teachers, and we look at that. We want to see, how, do we have tools that aren't being used at all? Is it something we need to change? We work with our leading and learning partners to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what tools are working for our students and staff. We started using the Microsoft BI tool to look at our inventory of devices. That's been a huge shift for us, giving us better visibility as to what we have in our schools. Naturally, we use our internal and external audits. We align ourselves with the district strategic plan as well as the Florida Department of Education technology plan, and several other items as well. This year was a little bit different with the pandemic ongoing. It was a little bit different to do some of those surveys and meet with some of those folks, but we still had tons of data to use for this plan. We also use nationwide surveys. The results that you see in front of you, this is from COSIN. They talk to IT leaders throughout the nation. We do this for two reasons. One, we want to make sure that any trends that we're seeing are somewhat in alignment with what's going on nationwide. We also use it to understand if there's some trends that we haven't seen yet, if something's coming our way. Going through these real quick, 3 challenges that a lot of districts are seeing is digital equity. And we're doing a lot of work in that area here in Brevard as well, so that wasn't a big surprise. The circle that we focus a lot of attention on are the 3 enablers: digital collaboration environments, broadband connectivity, and blended learning tools. And as a team, we're spending a tremendous amount of time in those 3 areas, so we feel like we're aligned pretty well with the national trends. So to talk about some of the projects, and also you notice that some of these slides, at the bottom, there's a page number, so if you're trying to follow along in the book as well, it just kind of keeps you on the right page. I included a subset of some of the projects in each strategic aligned area. The first 2, BPS computing, one-to-one computing implementation, and classroom modernization updates. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But we're doing other projects such as the learning management system assessment. Currently, we're testing new learning management systems for our teachers. with the probability that in the future that could also be something that works for our students as well. We always want to try to review tools to make sure we have the right tools in our hands, and also that they're most cost-effective as well. We're looking at possibly recommending a digital content specialist or web content specialist. As the district continues to grow, we continue to use more and more digital resources. Our websites continue to grow. Mr. Brune was in here as well. We're just running really short on resources, so there could be an opportunity that we need to add resources to that area. We have cabling projects, and the big project at the bottom is a student information system. Chris Moore alluded to it several times, and that project is on the board agenda for tonight as well, so we'll see how that goes. Exceptional workforce. When it comes to IT and technology, it's changing so quickly. We have to always assess our job descriptions, because if we don't, we won't be getting the right people to do the right work. So naturally, we are always looking at our job descriptions. We have to provide professional development. Again, technology is changing so fast. If we don't provide that professional development, we get behind the curve a little bit. And also in exceptional workforce, we're looking at work order and ticketing systems. Currently within the district, there are several ticketing systems, at least 3 to 4 that I can think of. Best case scenario, we have one integrated work order and ticketing system. So that's something we look at. Naturally, these systems don't work well for everyone. What works in IT may not work in facilities, it may not work in maintenance, so, but we want to continue to look, because if we don't do that assessment, we will never find the tool that we really need as a district. Community connection. We want to do another website assessment. Our current website is relatively new, but since I've been with the district, we've redone the website at least 3 times, maybe 4. It's not a fun thing to do. We have a lot of web pages, close to about 500 web pages as a district. So to redo all those, it is a big, big project. So what I'm building into our tech plan is to do an assessment of that, because every time we've redone the website, it's been for the same reason. There's so much data on there, you can't navigate it, you can't find what you need, and a lot of that's just because as a district we don't regularly go back and clean it up. So just trying to build that into the technology plan so that we can build it up, and hopefully this saves us money in the long run, so we're not doing that big project once again in a couple of years. And finally, in community connection, we want to review our mass communication systems and notification systems. This ties back to the student information system as well. New student information systems have some mass communication modules included in them. We pay for several modules right now, but there might be the opportunity to integrate to one module. Operational sustainability. We use several programs to try to maintain our sustainability. We use the district E-rate program. Not sure if you guys are familiar with that. That is a discount program for school districts and libraries. Based on your socioeconomic numbers, you get some very good discounts. I'm very careful to say discounts. We talked about that before. But currently, Brevard Public Schools, we qualify for 80% discounts. Chris, is that right? 80% discounts. In the simplest of explanations, if we're buying something for $100, we only pay $20. That is a big deal when you talk about millions and millions of dollars. It's 2 categories. It deals a lot with broadband, so that you can't just buy anything with it, but we do leverage that program quite a bit. Other sustainability items, computing device refreshment, it's a big deal as well. Cybersecurity upgrades, device asset management system. This becomes very important as we talk about one-to-one devices. Our schools, we heard them loud and clear. When we put about 15,000 devices out into the community during the pandemic, it was very hard to track them. It was very hard to get them out, very hard to bring them back in. It wasn't easy to run reports. So if we're going to move in that direction, very important that we have a proper system in place to do that. A big project that we're very excited about is our fiber network project. That is an E-ratable project. Days like today, having some internet issues, that's because a fiber line was cut down the street. We are laying our own fiber district-wide. which is going to save us some substantial money down the road once this project is complete. I'm not going to say a figure just because I know it can change, but it's going to be substantial savings to the district, but it will also improve our infrastructure. As we talk about one-to-one devices and things like that, our traffic will increase substantially. But if we have the infrastructure that can carry it, it's not going to be a problem. That's what that fiber project will provide us. And finally, we'll also be recommending another security staff member at some point, just because the nature of cybersecurity is becoming very difficult. I'll leave it at that for now. So recent accomplishments, I will say in our previous tech plan, we did not plan for a pandemic response. That was not written in there. But we had some great accomplishments as we met those challenges. A lot of it had to do with distance learning and hybrid learning. There was a lot involved in that technical response to do that. We had to change configurations. We had to stand up new systems. A lot had to be done. And this team, as well as the team that you don't see here in all of our schools, did a fantastic job of all of that. We did a device loan program rollout. We made professional development for students, for teachers, for our community. We did a hotspot distribution. But in the middle of that, we also did a whole new phone system district-wide, pretty much touching every classroom and every office in the entire district. Several other projects, VPN. We had a lot of staff that had never worked from home before. We hadn't been sending devices home before. There was a lot involved in setting that up and making sure our devices could, number one, work in that scenario, but also to ensure that we got them back protected as well. So now I want to talk about student device, one-to-one device initiative, and I want to start with a comment. We've learned that our ability to be flexible has a direct impact on the ability to respond to unforeseen challenges. Although planning for the unknown is difficult, planning to be flexible can no longer be negotiable for us. If we did not have the ability to be flexible, we would not have met the needs of our community as we responded to that pandemic. Some of it was luck. Some of it was good planning, and we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But moving forward, we felt it's so important. Just because you don't know what the next challenge is going to be, we have to be prepared. We have to put ourselves in the best predicament, in the best situation, as possible. So with that, we're recommending that we start moving as a district to a one-to-one student-to-device scenario. Why do one-to-one student device initiative? We have a changing educational landscape, and it can change any day, and it does change every day pretty much. We can provide real-life preparation. Our partners in Leading and Learning do a great job of finding rich digital content, and having one-to-one devices for our students will provide us to get that digital content in their hands a lot more. The digital divide, we've all talked about this before. One-to-one helps us with that. Maintaining student engagement. And also one-to-one can be a great recruiting tool, not only for students, but also for instructional staff as well. What does one-to-one provide? We hope that it provides enhanced student achievement. It decreases the achievement gaps. And again, back to student engagement. And an item we talk a lot about in ET, it develops literacy and digital communication skills. It's no doubt that our students are using technology. Most have phones or something. I think it's important that we focus on helping them understand the digital literacy, how to be safe, how to communicate appropriately. Those are big time items to us. So I want to be honest, right? There's a reason why everyone's not one-to-one. One-to-one started in the late 90s, and there's a lot of districts, including us, we're not a one-to-one district. There are obstacles, the cost, the budget. It's expensive to do. It's expensive to get enough devices, but it's also expensive to sustain those devices over time. Many will say it's an additional technical distraction. I would go as far as to say this is probably a technical distraction we would prefer rather than other technical distractions. How do you maintain engagement over time? Typically, when you start one-to-one, it's very exciting. Students are really on board, but you have to have the professional development and those things in place so that you can continue that engagement over a period of time. It's very important. Complexity of schools. We've already started meeting with our middle schools, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. It's very obvious to us that our schools are in different places. We have some schools that are ready to go one-to-one tomorrow. We have some other schools that have some work to do. There's some accountability, responsibility, all those things. You have to have those things in place before you move forward with one-to-one. It's important to me and my team. I'm sure it's important to you guys that our students act responsible with these devices. That's super important in the longevity of a program like this. Increased screen time. That's a big part of the discussion. But again, I would say this is the kind of screen time we want. There's screen time that we probably wouldn't prefer, but using rich digital content is probably a good type of screen time that we'd like to promote. The last three items are very important. Infrastructure, talked about it a minute ago. As we move forward with this, we have to have the infrastructure to support it. If we're going to give devices to every student, they need to be functional. They need to be able to get to where they need to go. Technical support. We have a lot of devices currently, and we do pretty good with technical support. I know Barrett would have a lot to say about that, but more devices, more technical support. As devices are going home and coming back, more technical support. That's definitely a concern. And then professional development. The only way we can do this and be successful is that our students and our instructors, everyone's all in. We have to understand how to, it's more than just giving out a device. It's how do we leverage the device to make a difference. On the right-hand side, I have a chart. This was interesting to me because it looked very different just 3 years ago. A lot of districts that were trying to move to one-to-one really used the BYOD approach because the funds weren't there. You look at the model now, this is a more current one, and one-to-one, or BYOD is at 1%. That is a big shift. A lot of that comes back to support. It's very difficult to support students bringing in devices that you don't have a lot of control over, you don't know what's on them. It's difficult on your network. There's a lot of variables there. It's very difficult to provide professional development on devices that are coming from home and you're not familiar with those devices. I would argue that it also doesn't help the digital divide so much because someone could be bringing a device that's not very good versus someone who has a great device. So providing district devices is that equalizer. It gives everyone the same opportunity, and we feel that's super important when looking at one-to-one. And by all means, if you have questions, you can interrupt me. I know I get going, but please don't hesitate. So I wanted to talk about some of the numbers when we talk about the one-to-one device initiative. On the left-hand side, we use something called the DDA. It's the device deficit analysis. And basically what we do is we look at every school individually in the district and we try to figure out how many devices is necessary for them to be one-to-one. To do that, there's two categories. There are devices that just don't meet the specs anymore. They can't run the content that's needed at the school level. A lot of our schools have a lot of labs. We're a lab-heavy district. Those devices aren't one-to-one devices. They're desktop devices, so they can't be moved. We have a lot of those. That was a big struggle for some of our schools during the pandemic response. We have schools who, pretty much the only thing they would ever want is a desktop device, so they didn't have anything to send home. So we've done that work. As you can see, you have high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, and you can see the difference. In both charts, you can see that middle schools, smaller target. The cost on the right-hand side just really reflects the DDA analysis that we've done. And it's because of these numbers and what we saw with middle schools. We have already gone forward and we started pushing forward with going one-to-one in our middle schools, our traditional middle schools, not our junior seniors at this time. What this will provide us is make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Okay, before I say that, sustainability, right? Getting to one-to-one is one thing, but sustainability is also just as important. We've discussed sustainability before. Last time I think we talked about the the district plan, we talked a lot about sustainability because we are up in, I don't know, Barrett, where are we with refreshment with our student devices? Just on our refreshment, pure refreshment. Gotcha.
Can you repeat that, Russell? What was that?
I could.
It was a 3.9 million, and it was for teacher and student. It wasn't differentiated.
So I'm more looking for the years. How many years are we looking for refreshment for our student devices?
So for student devices, we're planning on a 7-year life cycle with 100, yes, between 12 and 15, depending on the funds.
Correct. So if we continue doing business the way we're doing it today, it will be 12 to 15 years before a device we bought today would be refreshed again. And as you can imagine, again, how often do we get a new phone? It's pretty tough. So the chart on the left-hand side is our current refreshment rates that we have as far as the funding that we have. Typically, we will request about 3 million or so starting in year 15, 16. And you can see we've come in typically a little bit lower than that. In 2021, you'll see a big jump. Again, that's when we were responding to a pandemic, so we knew we had some work to do. But on the right-hand side, I just wanted to show a visual. This isn't in the actual plan, but I want to show a visual so that you can see how quickly the sustainability can become a problem for a district. So at the right-hand side, the blue is actually our refreshment request, and the orange would be what we've been funded for refreshment. So if you look in year 1, you have refreshment, and as you transition to year 2, you still have that same refreshment need, but now you have to add what you didn't do in year 1. And the same thing happens in year 3 and year 4. In year 5, you finally get some pretty quality refreshment funds, but your problem has gotten so big it doesn't have nearly the kind of impact that it should. So when we talk about one-to-one student device initiatives, it's very, very important that we talk about the sustainability of it. The last thing you want to do is move forward with a project like this, and then again, you have devices that are sitting there 15 years old, and that's all the student has to work with. So the plan overall, again, like I said, we are moving forward with traditional middle schools. It was a target that we were able to hit with the funding that we had available for this year. But we have 2 other groups, and we want to make sure that we're making the right decision. So what we're doing at the elementary level in grades kindergarten to 2nd grade, we're doing a pilot, and those pilots will consist of touch devices. One thing, if you have little ones around, they have learned to learn with touch devices. The concern is then they come to our schools and they don't have those touch devices, and there's an engagement concern right off the bat. So what we're testing, what we're piloting is getting some iPad devices. We're going to pilot in several schools. How many? I think it's 5 schools. Because we also have schools that already have laptops in our young learners' hands. But we want to see what that difference is. We want to see if the engagement's better with those touch devices, because again, we all know they're kind of coming to us. They have their mom or dad's iPhone, they have a Kindle, they have an iPad, they have something at home that they've already learned to learn with. And then they come to our schools and it's kind of like, what do I do? So I'm going to pilot that just to make sure we're making the right decision. Before we fully invest, we want to understand, is that the right device for our students? Similarly, in high schools, we want to take some of what we learn moving forward with the middle schools and just understand, is this the right next step? Again, it's not just about putting devices in our students' hands, it's doing it the right way. High schools have special programs, working with Leading and Learning, talking with our principals, talking with teachers, talking with students. We really want to understand what a one-to-one should look like for our high schools before we do it. So we're really excited about that work. This is a big initiative. It was interesting, I was talking to a neighboring district about cybersecurity, and we got off topic a little bit, and we started talking about one-to-one, and they're looking at doing the exact same thing with their early learners. They want to get touch devices in their hands to see if that fixes some of the issues that they're seeing with those students each day. So next I want to talk about the actual classroom. For the last 10, probably closer to 15 years now, we've been implementing something called the 21st century classroom. That classroom consists of several tools, similar to in here. You have a ceiling-mounted projector, a dot camera, and a teacher would have a desktop computer on their desk. Also, there were sound amplification systems so that you could be heard throughout the class. Several tools that we thought would sufficiently equip a classroom. We've done that for some time. We've been renewing it as we can. But if you've been to any of the schools that the last two schools that we've opened, South Lake Elementary and Vieira Elementary, we started doing what we call the classroom of the future. This is a classroom that is a little bit more flexible, allows teachers to come into the classroom and you're not just locked to your desk, you're not locked to the front of the room. If you want to do some other things, we think this kind of classroom gives you that flexibility. The central point of this classroom is an interactive flat panel display. Used to have one in here, but again, it's all about the engagement. Also, a big part of this classroom is the fact that it will work very well with one-to-one technology. It can allow students to connect to the screen up front and share some work and do things like that. A teacher will have a mobile device, so they're not locked to the front of the classroom. They can walk around, they can do different things. In some cases, it's a touch device. It's a device they can draw on. Just trying to make our classrooms more flexible for several reasons, to meet the needs of our students, to meet the needs of our teachers, but again, also a great recruiting tool. There's, when you think about students in college today, if they're working towards becoming a teacher, the last thing they probably have is a desktop, right? But as soon as they come into one of our classrooms, that's all they have. They're now stuck behind that desk again. Want to provide them with some technology that really motivates them to do something cool and fun in the classroom. So that's classroom of the future. Again, being honest, these things cost. This is something we want to do. There are costs associated with it. So we've started doing the research to see what that would look like district-wide. We've done 2 schools. I know Mr. Alt has some other projects. When we have the opportunity, we will do a classroom here and there. We have a couple middle school classrooms. I think we've done a few in the high schools. So we're trying to get that out and test it in different environments to make sure it works for everyone. It's worked well in our elementary schools that we have it in so far, and we're looking to continue that. But again, there are costs associated with it, and with those costs comes sustainability. And finally, I want to talk quickly about funding. Displayed here is this is some more national data. It shows as much as technology changes from one year to the next, the biggest challenges for IT leaders has not changed. And every year it's the same one. It's budget constraints and lack of resources. It's somewhat comforting to understand that this is a nationwide issue. It's not just a Brevard County ET issue. It is something that's nationwide. Again, having a conversation with some of my colleagues, and we were saying, there's only been a few times where you really see big shifts in technology in K-12, specifically in Florida. The last one, we saw it when we did Race to the Top. I don't know if you guys remember that. There was a lot of funds for technology when we did Race to the Top. Another time you'll see it is if a district gets a surtax or a millage or something like that that has a laser focus towards technology. And then currently, there's some opportunity that may present itself when we talk about the CARES Act or the ESSER or the ARP. It has so many names at this point. But there's another opportunity, and I'm talking with other district leaders just to understand how they're trying to leverage it, and are we trying to do the same things. So our budget is, most of our budget is in 2 areas. We have an operating budget, and then we have capital outlay. Thought it was beneficial to really see just kind of where the funds go when it comes to ET. A lot of it goes to subscription and software. We put it back in the classroom. We put it back for our teachers and our students to use. That's where a lot of our funding goes. Additionally, we do naturally network communications. Then we have core systems that we do FTE, payroll, and all those things out of. Very important to pay our folks, right? In the capital outlay area, again, we're only allowed to do certain things with these funds, but you can see we do classroom infrastructure. Our technology support services team uses funding to continuously, lucky for us in the sense that we have a group like that. Not every district does have a group that's within the district that fixes devices. We've been able to make our devices last a lot longer because we have that group. Typically, if we were to send some of the devices we have out, they would probably say it's not worth it to fix. But luckily, we have a group here they're committed to the task, so they keep our stuff running as long as they can. Computer refreshment comes out of this area, and then some network infrastructure and cybersecurity. And I showed you 2 years worth of data. The current year and proposed for next year is in orange. Some other technology sources for funding, surtax naturally. We use that for technology equipment renewal. Those are projects like our technology building cabling, similar to what we do in facilities with roofs and things like that. We have the same issue with wiring with technology. A lot of our schools were not built to have the amount of technology that we have running through them, so we have to bring them up to speed. So a lot of cabling and things like that being done. Technology infrastructure renewal, those are servers, those are routers, those are wireless access points, things of that nature. It gets hot in Florida. Those things go bad a little quicker here. And then cybersecurity and network infrastructure there as well. Another project, I thought it was important to point this out, Digital Classroom Plan. That was a 5-year project from DOE that was really, it was very helpful. It allowed us to put some additional devices in the classroom. I want to say it was aligned with testing a little bit back when we were going towards computerized testing, but it was a 5-year project. And as you can see in year 1920, when that 5 years was up, it fell off and it fell in a hurry. Can't do a lot with it. It's less than $200,000 now, but we still try to leverage it as best we can, just putting it right back in the classroom. And then finally, the E-rate discount program. As a district, we've been a great user of that. Again, there's 2 categories. It's very specific what you can use it for, but we do our best to leverage that anytime we can. That's huge, huge savings. With that, I'm done. Hopefully it didn't take too long, but hopefully you guys have questions.
That was fast, Russell. Thank you. Anyone have questions for Russell?
I have questions, but I want to say something.
Ms. McDougall.
Well, first I want to thank you all very much. This was very well thought out, but it kind of makes me cry because we don't, we need to find the money. I mean, if we're really going to do this, show me the money, and we really need to find it. And I know a lot of times in the budget, this is one thing that we seem to slice some more off of, and I think we need to all think about that really long and hard, because this is the right thing to do. But thank you, very well put together.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. McDougall. Ms. Jenkins, did you want the mic?
Yes, please. My first question is, Mr. Cheatham, did you cut that fiber to make this plan a little more palatable to the board today?
I wish I could say I did, but no, it's a bit of a headache when fiber gets cut.
So I have a couple of questions. So first, you mentioned that there was 5 schools that you're piloting the K through second. Do you happen to know those offhand, which schools those are?
I do. Atlantis, Saturn, Holland, Ocean Breeze, Port Malabar.
Okay, thank you. Because the reason I'm asking that question was just I was curious if there was variability of if students typically have access at home versus students that may not, since you're kind of trying to see the engagement increase there. So another question, you kind of touched on this, but I just want to get a little bit of clarification. So when you're talking about capital, you had mentioned, I think it was on our page 30. So I remember very vividly when we reviewed the draft proposal for capital budget, the huge slice from your requested to what you were being proposed. So can you kind of give us a ballpark idea of what those numbers were? Like, what did you request and what was proposed back to you?
Yearly, we request, at this point with the amount of devices we have, I think we're at a $5 million yearly request typically. Okay, a little over $5 million.
Okay, and what was the, I'm using the wrong word, but the approved, what was the proposed?
The proposed
Yeah.
amount is 3.5, I believe, 3.4, 3.5.
Yeah. And I know everyone on the board is aware of that, but I just like kind of want to heighten the attention to that. That was really alarming to me when I saw it on the capital proposal. Just like you said here, you know, the little bit of money that we put in for what we actually need to keep up with that refreshment plan is really important for us to pay attention to what we're prioritizing. Another question I have is, when we're talking about classrooms of the future, if we make this happen and we make this happen district-wide, has there been any discussion about the rollout plan? Who's going to get access to it first? And the main reason I'm asking is just something that pops up in my head is, you know, if these go to priority schools first, this is going to students who have the largest learning gaps. This can possibly be a recruitment tool for teachers to go to those schools first because they're going to have access to that technology that they may not have in a different school. So is this something that's been talked about or a plan at all?
Well, we just recently kind of came up with the figures. We definitely look to the board and to the superintendent to give us guidance on the best way to implement that. We typically work very closely with facilities as they have projects that go into classrooms and do things like that. We usually like to leverage that opportunity if a classroom's kind of being torn down, and let's get in there when it's being built back up with the other departments and build that classroom up together. It saves costs typically. So we'd align it that way, but definitely we, as a district, you know, we've prioritized some schools and we would continue to do that.
Thank you. I'm really excited. Thank you so much for putting this together. This is something that was really important to me before I even ran a campaign to come on this board. I always found it very interesting that we are the Space Coast. We're launching rockets into space. We're sending humans into space again. And our students don't have access to that technology to land them in that career and that job. We've got Boeing, Harris, Grumman, LG, SpaceX, NASA, everybody right here, and we need to provide that workforce for those companies to stay here and for those companies to continue to come here. So it's not only important for our students, but it's important for our community and our economy. I think it's also really important for us to recognize that if we invest in this and we invest in our students, when we need to ask our community for sales surtax or for a millage, we're providing them with a really concrete, hands-on example of something they already have and they don't want to lose as to why we need that funding, why we need to refresh it. And it's convenient that that timeline is 6 years. But I appreciate it so much. I do want to say one other thing too. I know before I came on the board, we had to go to the county commission to request some CARES money, and one of the things that wasn't approved was certain technology for our young students, for our pre-K and our kindergarten kids. And one thing I really think is interesting that a lot of people aren't aware of is our pre-K students are taking their yearly assessments on computers. They have to take it on a computer. And so the fact that we can't accept or acknowledge that our little ones need to understand technology is alarming to me. And so we need to provide it to them. We need to provide it to them in the correct way and help them be successful in the future. And again, it's to supplement, it's not to supplant. So we need to do it wisely. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Ms. Campbell?
I do. Thank you guys for all the work you've done this past year, because I know you guys are all behind the scenes, but the work you've done has supported every single other person who works for this district, and we very much appreciate the work that you guys do. I know Russell praises you all the time, but just wanted it to come from our lips as well. We appreciate the support that you give all our staff. I loved when we talked the 101 plan, I kept seeing the word, I don't think you ever wrote it in here, but equity is all over these pages. Talking about gaps, but also increasing student engagement. That's equity. You know, developing literacy, digital communication skills. It's all over that. So I very much appreciate that. Couple of questions. One, when we talk about laying the fiber optic network, that kind of, I'm more of a music geek than a computer geek, but that kind of geeks me out just a little bit. I'm excited. So if we're doing that, does that prevent, not just things like today, but I'm thinking of examples in the past couple of years where, let's say, AT&T is working on something in a neighborhood and the entire Meadow Lane Central Row goes out, no phones. That was the first day of school, actually, I believe, a couple years ago.
It
Does
was.
that prevent things like that happening because we're working off of our own fiber?
So no, and
Okay.
that was a little hesitation of my own, because, I was thinking, we'll have this fiber, but we're not, any of these big companies that have a truck that can pull up and just start digging in the ground
Right.
type of thing. But the same way that their fiber is buried, that's the same way our fiber will be buried.
Okay.
So if someone could cut ours just as easily as
Right,
anyone else's.
but if AT&T is working on something, we're separate, we would be separate then from the work they would be doing.
Correct.
Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. And Chris, I don't know if you want to speak to it a little bit.
Yeah, so the fiber network that we're putting in the ground through this project, it's not to get too technical.
Chris, is your mic on?
Is my mic on?
It is.
All right, perfect. So the fiber optic network that we're putting in the ground it's called a fiber ring. So our two hub sites, the one in Meadow Lane and the one here, is actually on a physical topological ring. So it will help mitigate to some degree if there is a cut, because we would have some redundancy built in. So it
Right.
would help in that manner.
But we're separated from the neighborhoods that are also pulling off of the same,
So,
right, which
yeah,
helps.
the fiber that we're putting in is dedicated to BPS,
And it
only.
actually also helps the community, because I know in times of the year when our schools are doing testing, I have heard people say, man, what's going on with the network today? And, oh, the schools are testing, so everybody's using it at the same time. So we avoid that as well, right?
Absolutely.
So, and then something Ms. Jenkins said, we talked about K through 12, but there's no pre-K. You don't talk about pre-K so much in here. Because some of their funding is separate, but, and I know you guys oversee that as well, but is their funding separate from our K-12 funding that allows us to purchase devices and do some of the things we talked about here for all our VPK and Head Start? And I know Head Start has their own budget, but does that kind of incorporate for our pre-K kids as well?
And I'm going to pass this one to Don, because I know there's a Head Start pilot or program that's going on that kind of worked into our plan as well.
Yeah, the Head Start programs are going one-to-one with iPads. In the next week, we have the rollout of that.
Wow.
So they had some separate funding, and they were able to do that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But as far as our other, because if we're going to get touch devices in our K through 2, in our schools that have VPK, other kinds of VPKs besides Head Start, are we going to be able to purchase those for our littlest ones as well? Eventually, at least?
That would be the goal. Like I said, right now we're doing a pilot because we want to make sure that's the answer, right? If it works out and there is a difference between the touch screens versus the iPad, I don't want to go too far and say, hey, we're going to do this, that, and that, because we are doing a pilot to understand if it's the right thing to do. But if it's the right thing to do, we'll do it.
You talked about screen time. Our youngest learners are some of the ones that probably, that's the biggest concern. And they do need to be able to, I don't know that they need a one-to-one, like need everyday access to devices every day.
True.
They need to be playing, right? Playing with each other in social interaction. But they do need to have access, maybe more than what they have right now. So they're ready to take up the technology that they're going to need in the coming years and for those assessments. I think that's all I have.
And the digital divide is a big part of that as well. We have a lot of students, if they're not touching a device at the school, they're not touching a device at all. So we're thinking about that as well.
Thank you.
Good to go? So one of the issues that we had is, I was going to ask, we keep buying like software and everything else, right? Is there a procedure in place that before purchases are made, whether that's, we talk about the one for the school board, for the teachers to ask ahead of time, but internally, is there a process that every single time we purchase some kind of software, they come back to you for approval to make sure that it can fit into our configuration? Or is it just allowed that if an organ, like a principal or secondary or primary or whatever, I can just go purchase it and we catch up on the back end? Is there an internal process, Dr. Mullins, that we check with IT prior to those?
Right, so there's two types of software purchases. There are the large ones, and those absolutely come through us, just based on the costs and the impact that it has on the district. We have to test and make sure that it will run appropriately. But I think probably what you're talking about are those kind of one-offs that a teacher may do, or if they go to a conference, they get a free software package or something like that.
Those are okay, but I'm talking about like do we ever have like secondary schools purchase something or primary schools purchase like a book or something and it's online and, you know what I mean? Is there there's a process in place for you?
We do, and there's a process. It's
Okay.
a process we have been working to bring a little bit more control over, because it's very difficult. It's been very difficult. But I work with procurement, and typically if they get anything that crosses their desk
I
as far
see.
as a software purchase, even if it's a
Okay.
small one, it comes through.
Because there's a
through me
lot
and
of
my
times
team.
there's grants coming in, there's probably stuff flying everywhere, and it's not the fault of anybody, but they may just be coming in, and as long as there's a throat or somewhere to check, a funnel, that's all. As long as
It's a lot, and I'll say we're working on it, but it's a lot. There's a lot of software out there. I think of the example, there was a district whose network pretty much came down and couldn't figure out why, but it was a new piece of software that was out there, hadn't been properly vetted, just didn't agree with what was going on the network, and it pretty much brought them down until they could figure out what exactly was going on in this one classroom in the corner of the district. It was tough.
I was in another school board, and the guy that has Russell's job was standing there saying, he almost had that exact same thing. The reason I asked you was because they had the same thing. Like, they had all these people purchasing stuff, and he was like, so I was just going to ask that. The other thing I was going to, did you say?
Mr. Sue, well, just to add to that, a few years ago, actually, I believe it was when I was COO, Russell identified that as a challenge, and we built it in a strategic plan, and since then, we built in an ET representative on every procurement software-related purchase. So that didn't exist previously. That's put an additional strain on ET to be part of those procurement teams, but
It's worth it.
It's beginning to narrow that, that funnel you were suggesting.
Yeah, and then I had another question. So we go to one-to-one, right? All these kids get these devices. Who is imaging those? Who is doing that at the end? So like, because I remember the techs that were at like the schools had a room full of the computers just from the teachers, right? And they had to go through that process. Who's doing that? Do we send them out to get imaged? How are we doing that?
A little bit of both. So we have some programs where we can receive our devices with an image on them. But typically, our summer work is typically re-imaging and cleaning things up. So, you're still going to have that work in-house even after you get those devices, because we want to keep those devices running. And the best way to do that is each year or whenever we can to kind of re-image those machines and keep them as sharp as we can. But that work falls, if it's not from the vendor, it falls on our technical support at our schools and at the district office as well.
And I'm sorry, let me get this straight. So if we go to one-to-one for a school district, the kids actually are going to bring these computer devices with them. They're theirs to use, or are they locked into the school? They have to drop them.
So let me clarify. That's a great question. So we see this as being multi-phased, right? First, we have to get enough devices to say we're one-to-one. What we wouldn't want to have happen is these set of schools have this opportunity to be one-to-one tomorrow, but yet these schools don't. We need to make sure that when we're one-to-one, everyone has that same opportunity. There are some other things that we definitely have to do. During the pandemic response, when we put out, like I said, approximately about 15,000 devices, because of the nature of the pandemic, several companies gave us some things. They gave us these filters that need to be on every machine before you send them home. They're not going to continue to do that. So that's something that has to be in place before we even start sending these devices home. Another thing that I think is really important is having that device asset management system. I liken it to schools checking out books. A quick way to scan a device and get it out the door, but a quick way to get it back in as well. During the pandemic response, we stood up a solution within our own system very quickly. Had about a week or so, but it worked. We got the devices out. We got them back eventually. But we need a better system in place because it was very stressful for our schools. And we don't want this to be just another thing that slows our schools down. We need to be a little bit more helpful in that space.
Thank you. So
eventually, yes, we would like to see them kind of travel with the students, but that's not going to be phase one. Phase one, we want to make sure there's one-to-one for everyone and that the devices are properly protected before they go home.
And are they still taking, I'm sorry to run down this, are they still imaging those, physically carrying them, or are they Ethernetting in and imaging them in place in their, how are you guys re-imaging them? You were head of techs, I'm sorry.
So most schools roll the cart back to their office and do a cart at a time, plug them in, and do them. Most techs can get through 3 to 5 cards a day. So sounds like a lot, but if you get to like Viera High,
Yeah.
it starts to get tedious.
Yeah.
We do have tools in place that are accelerating that, and there's some programs that Microsoft is up to leverage. One of them is the buzzwords out there, autopilot, where you could just send a command over the web, it turns on, reimages itself, rejoins, gets the policy, gets the software. It takes a lot of setup in the background, a lot of testing and verification, but that's one of the directions we want to go. It doesn't work with one-to-many machines, with one-to-one machines, it's very difficult.
And that software probably doesn't work so well on the older ones because it runs through. You need to have the newer ones. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
It'll work on the
Okay.
stuff that's within 7 years old.
Okay, I got you. Because one of the things I'm fearful of is I'm fearful that we're reducing the amount of techs inside of our district at the exact same time as we're increasing our entire infrastructure and cost, right? So what I'm fearful of is that we reduce our techs, but then we're going to one-to-one, we're creating this entire thing, and I think there might be an opportunity for us to reconvene over looking at those techs at each one of the schools, that's all. It's not here, it's just a conversation for later. I just needed to hear the walkthrough of what they do, because I actually would help bring the computers down when I was teaching, and it's a madhouse to try to get a Viera to get done. For one tech to not only do that, but then even if you're re-imaging it, you probably still need to actually physically check the hardware to make sure that all the stuff works, all the keyboards work, all of the, you know what I mean? So that's just, in doing that for a big school with one tech is a nightmare.
And that was one of the concerns I had on the list is tech support. You know, with more devices becomes more support. But we've done a pretty good job of looking for tools that, what do we call them, multipliers? Basically makes one tech, you know, as powerful as 3 and things like that. We're looking for things to keep them. That's important.
Russell, I really appreciate, I mean, I want to say this publicly. I appreciate the fact that every year you've been a team player. I've been over Russell for capital outlay since I've almost been a school board member. And every year he's coming to the table to make the cuts, and he is the nicest guy. If I ask him, Russell, what do you need? He won't give me, he won't tell me, he won't say what's the issues. He just tries to, he won't do it. So I've been trying to bother other people in your position in other counties to try to figure out what you might need. So I do want to say thank you for everything that you've done. But there needs to come a time, just like you were saying, Ms. McDougall, where we need to sit down and just start saying, okay, if we're going to be serious about this, if we're really going to move one-to-one, if we're really going to do those things, then we do need to look at maybe we just need to look at what we currently have and start nixing some of the things. We have a huge opportunity to take a leapfrog forward with what we have with CARES Act money and everything else that qualify for it. Maybe this is the time. Maybe. I mean, if you guys are willing to do it, I'd sit down. And maybe we sit down and say, what's it going to cost to accelerate past the 3 million, but to the 5 million to get where we need to be? Where's it going to cost to get the techs where we need to be? Because we just keep coming around every year saying the same thing. Oh, we need more. And just like you were saying, Ms. Jenkins, when you were talking about where the Space Coast, the thing that stinks is we're constricted to the same money that Volusia County has, and then leveraging all of those big partners, they will, but the majority of hires that they do for their engineers are from outside of our area, which is sad. You know what I mean? So I agree with you, but there's just some things that we can do physically with the CARES Act money and some other stuff that I think that could leverage us forward. And if you guys are willing to do it, we could sit with Dr. Mullins and move forward on it. But we got to stop either saying it or we just kind of let it be the way it is. That's all.
Can I jump on that real quick, just as a follow-up to that? If this is ever a priority for our district, which it should be, I'd be shocked if anyone would feel like it wasn't. This is the time where it has to be done, realistically. It will never happen any other time. We have over $100 million coming in from federal CARES money. This needs to be a priority, not a question. And I will die on that sword. and Dr. Mullins knows I will. And so does Mr. Cheatham. It has to happen. It's not a question. Going forward, we need to reprioritize the capital budget and what's happening there, because there's a lot of things that are on that list that, yes, they're important, but if this is going to be our focus, this has to be number one, and it has to happen sooner than later. And when we have conversations about competing with charter schools and being concerned about how West Viera is building up and West Melbourne's building up and South Palm Bay is building up, and we're concerned that charter schools might pop up and compete for our students, well, then we need to do this now because this is something that they would have a problem competing with. This would be something to really entice our families to see that we're investing in our public education, in our traditional schools, and we're investing in our students. We are never going to have this kind of money sitting in our laps to make it happen this quickly and equitably across the board for our giant district. So I had to jump in on there. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Susan.
No, no problem. So with that said, you had mentioned that we sort of had a plan moving forward to get to one-on-one. Dr. Mullins had already spoken to me and said, we've got a plan, we're putting it in place. Does that mean that you feel comfortable that in the next year and a half, 2 years, that the current plan and funding gets us there? Can you explain that piece? Do we need to go, like we're talking about, pull it down and start looking at it, or is it where it needs to be? Dr. Mullins, I don't know who to direct that to.
Yeah, so yes, it's absolutely a priority, and to echo what's already been suggested, the federal stimulus dollars provide a moment in time that it can be accelerated. The plan itself prioritizes that this is number one, one-to-one. And the federal funding aside, the prospect, the journey to get there is probably, I don't know, it's many years out. If in working with Mr. Cheatham, he has targeted it for probably $18 million to go to complete one-to-one what hasn't been done. Now this team is already launching one-to-one in our middle schools this fall. So it's those other pieces that have to be addressed. So the federal stimulus dollars are absolutely the opportunity. It is the gateway to vastly accelerate the movement to one-to-one, and that is the priority as we anticipate those dollars. But I do have to let the board, remind the board for a couple of reasons. One, so you and the public are aware, but also we may need to do some door knocking soon, because ESSER number 2, so there's CARES Act, there's ESSER what we call ESSER number 2, and then there's ARP, which is the most recent federal stimulus. CARES Act that we received back over the summer, we've received those. We're in the process of expending those, most of them by the end of this school year. ESSER number 2, which was approved on December 27th, we've only received a portion of those funds, and there's been no indication yet from the Department of Education of when the release of the remaining funds is going to be moving forward. So we've only been able to prioritize dollars for what we absolutely know we can cover. Summer school is a big one. So we know we want to expand summer school. So those funds are prioritized for academic supports in these months and the summer and so on. ESSER number 3, or what the federal government is calling ARP, and I won't remember what it stands for now. American Rescue Plan, thank you. We have not received one communication from the Florida Department of Education of what that looks like, what the process will be for us to submit, and that sort of thing. So it's my understanding that the states received those dollars, I want to say 3 to 4 weeks ago, and that in the provision, I read myself, in the provision for the American Rescue Plan dollars, that SEAs, state education agencies, have 60 days to distribute the funds to LEAs, from our public schools, local education agencies. So we're nearing the close of that window, assuming that that's the correct interpretation, and we'll be able to know more. But we've not received, I don't want to say we're not moving forward. We're posturing and positioning to accelerate that one-to-one priority, but we can't spend money. We don't know what the implementation is. So, yes, I think we are positioned very advantageously to move forward very aggressively in that one-to-one initiative over the course of the next 2-ish years, if that doesn't create too much angst across the team, because that's still a lot of devices, into the tens of thousands of devices. So, but my kudos to this team, who have admirably and successfully tackled any and every challenge that they've been confronted with over the last, particularly over the last 16 months, so.
Dr. Mullins, I think that's a great, a great explanation of everything. I think the toughest part is that we have all these great ideas, and then Dr. Mullins has to actually look at the budget. For instance, if we wanted to do more techs, you have tier 3 intervention teachers, 10 of them. You have tier 3 intervention teachers in primary, second tier support. You would have to take away from that. I'm not advocating for that, but I'm saying that those are the hard decisions that we would have to do, that Dr. Mullins sits on every day. So if we want to move in that direction, and if you guys want to sit down and tackle it, I'm be willing to do it. But we have to know that some of these are the ones that would have to go. That's all. I'm done. Oh, can you monitor usage by class? Usage of the computers, Wi-Fi. So you can tell, like a principal can tell. I know we already check iReady for usage. Can you check usage of programming and everything else? Like, is there a way to check that?
We have several things that can check, different statistics based on
See what
the bandwidth used and things like that.
Right, like, so we'd go one-to-one for an entire school, and then you've got the guy who's the teacher that, anti-Mr. I don't even check my email guy, right? He doesn't implement it. Is there a way to check that, is all I'm saying? Because we want a fidelity, like you talked about. Like, if we're going to do this, that there needs to be. There's a way to do that? Yeah. Oh, okay, thanks.
I would also say, as an educator, you are literally evaluated on your use of technology in the classroom, which is kind of ironic. I had this conversation with Mr. Cheatham, but it's often a dog and pony show, kind of scraping together the resources that you have to find some kind of collaborative lesson plan with your students to show that you're using technology. But I mean, that in and of itself is a way to have some fidelity with it.
And this is a living, breathing document, so as I get feedback from you guys and things change with budget or whatever, we expect to be changing this document in the next couple of years. That's an expectation of ours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cheatham and team. As has been mentioned by several people, you guys have been so amazing in our success over all of the pandemic challenges, and really helping us grow and support our students as a district through so many of the different challenges. And I'm super excited about the plan that you brought forward. I'll try to be quick because I know we are moving toward our actual board meeting. So one of the things that you mentioned, Mr. Cheatham, was the digital divide, and I know that you indicated that these devices are not initially going to be going home with students. But I think one of the inevitable challenges that we have to consider is when we move out of phase 1 into phase 2, I know we had significant investment or donation of hotspots in response to the pandemic. Are we factoring into the technology plan some way to address that? I mean, I know there's a lot of, like, they're putting more and more satellites up to start to close that digital divide and that sort of thing, but what is the realistic expectation of that?
Another great question. Just this week, we've talked with one of our surrounding cities about, in unison with our fiber project, about bringing some more community Wi-Fi into some of our communities. And we hope if we can move forward with that one, we can maybe put a little pressure on some other communities to do the same. So we are looking at, I mean, that's a very real problem. And it's a relatively big cost for the district to provide that bandwidth to students once they leave our schools. So we are kind of walking out some different possibilities there, and have a good one that we think might work out.
So I will be happy to champion conversations with our other communities throughout the district if you'd like to partner me with one of your folks that can speak intelligently about the issue. I can certainly speak passionately about it, but I think having that background knowledge and knowing how to get us there would be helpful as well. Instead of me just coming in and banging on doors, But I do think that is really important because we know that one of the big issues, right, is most students are touching computers when they're in the classroom at some point. But one of the big issues is that students who have access outside of the classroom have a significant advantage over those who do not. And so
absolutely.
I just want to make sure that's a piece that we keep in the conversation, and I am happy to facilitate conversations, and I can be somewhat persuasive sometimes. So gotcha. I would be happy to assist in that as we have those conversations. one of the things that I think comes up, and not to say, I don't want to generalize and say that our students are smarter than all of us when it comes to technology, because obviously you guys are probably smarter than our students. And to some extent, perhaps we are too, and some of our educators, but I feel like our youth are so much smarter about how to get around our security practices and what resources are out there that they really shouldn't be involved in, and that becomes a real challenge, I feel like, for our teachers. How do we plan on handling that as we expand use? Is that a...
Professional development is key. Having the right tools on our network is also key to monitoring and keeping everyone safe. But we have a lot of students that will, they're quick to help their instructors. If they're struggling with something, they're the first ones to jump up there. Oh, this is how you do it.
Right.
We have a lot of faith in our students. But yeah, just having the right tools in place, that's helpful, because the nature of technology, it's going to keep changing. When you figure it out, it changes again. That's just the way it is, and that's why we talk a lot about professional development for our staff, because we don't want to put them in a bad situation.
Awesome.
Ms. Belford, just to echo that point, and it's really a kudos to the team, Dr. Braunstein and her team. They have pivoted, they have adjusted, adapted to professional development environments, and every conversation I've had with Mr. Cheatham, what are we doing? Can we do more? Can we go faster? He always reminds me of, don't forget, it's one thing to push out devices to schools, it's another thing to build capacity around utilizing them with our staff. And he always talks about professional development dollars to help support that and reinforce it. So just kudos to that point.
Absolutely. This one I think is an easy one. Chris, you know the awesome amplification balls that we have at South Lake that you can toss across the classroom and the student can use it to amplify their voice? When we're talking about, Russ is smiling because everyone loves the amplification balls, right? When we're talking about expanding that classroom of the future, that's one of the things that I feel like you think it's a really simple thing, right? But for kids who might be shy, the kids who are constantly being told to speak up in class, I think that's a really fun way to increase their engagement and willingness to speak up in the classroom and engage with peers. Are we looking along the lines of that type of thing where students would also have access to amplification?
So yeah, that program does include upgraded amplification systems for the classroom. The ones that we're looking at currently don't necessarily have that component as part of it, but adding something like that would not be a big issue.
Okay, awesome.
From a technology standpoint.
Sweet.
Have to bring one of those to one of the board meatings, let you
Yeah.
guys toss it around a little bit.
Maybe a board workshop, because, on our pilot with our littles, our pre-Kers, one of the things that Ms. Jenkins mentioned was that they are taking assessments on computers. So do those assessments translate to a touch platform for the students, or are those assessments strictly limited to keyboard input and mouse input, or?
So let me clarify, the pilot that we were talking about, that's kindergarten through second. But the program that Dr. Bronstein was talking about was a Time Start program.
Yeah.
So I don't know very much about it, but Dr. Bronstein might know.
Yeah, no, that's being handled by Leading and Learning, and I'm not sure about the assessment. I haven't looked at the kindergarten assessment.
Awesome, thank you.
Ms. Belford, I could just say from my experience, I've only seen it on a desktop.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
So one of the things that we had discussed as we were going through the pandemic was we had teachers who were, not only were they transitioning to utilizing all the digital tools and relearning how to engage with students and all of those things, but they were spending an awful lot of time on tech support with parents and students with like difficulty logging on to a computer, or difficulty logging into an account and that sort of thing. And we had kind of kicking around thoughts, talked about like a centralized tech support specifically for that, so teachers weren't spending so much time on those issues. Is that something that you envision being built into our plan going forward as we expand? I can just picture, obviously we have laptop carts that come into the classroom now, right? And if we have a 45-minute class period and the teacher spends 20 minutes finally getting the last student logged onto their computer, I know obviously your techs are going into classrooms and assisting with that as well. So is there, I know you said you're looking at force multipliers. Is there any type of force multiplier for that type of situation to take some of that tech support legwork off of our teachers?
There is. We learned a lot through responding to the pandemic, but we also hope to learn even more as we move forward with the middle schools. What I hope will happen is as it becomes more natural to have a device in your hand each and every day, some of those things you see at the onset, they kind of go away. When you're not doing something every day, it's a bit of a problem.
Right.
Typically when we come back from spring break or Christmas break, it's amazing what we see. But if they're using these devices each and every day, we like to think that some of that support that's needed is a little less.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm super excited about the potential that we have in front of us. And the only thing I just want to put out there on the table, we have all of these federal dollars coming in, and certainly it's going to allow us to accelerate the phenomenal plans that we have. But I think it's important for us us as a board and as a community really, to keep in mind that we can't utilize one-time federal dollars for reoccurring costs. And so that when we talk about needing additional techs and needing to hire additional people, that I think is where we have to do the hard work, Mr. Susan, with regard to looking at existing dollars, because many of those things are not going to be short-term issues. They're going to be long-term supports that we're going to have to provide. So I just want to make everyone aware it's not like we have this windfall of money that's going to keep coming to us. So, and with that, I have nothing else. Does anyone else have anything for the team other than enormous appreciation and excitement? All right.
Thank
Hearing
you.
no further business, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Cheatham and team.
Thank you.
Ms. Belford?